Welcome back to the Rockman Reviews, and with Season 1 behind us, it's finally time to start on where the series starts to, for the most part, improve. And with the most important aspect of animation at that, an actual budget to animate and commission music with. Shown off as Neto and Rockman get into a net battle in Net City's arena, and it's a stark and positive improvement than what we'd seen of the series before. Seriously, it's like night and day with what was available before, that it seriously does feel like a soft reboot. With Neto once more shirking the idiot protagonist label as he completely reads the attacks of their opponents and leads Rockman to decimating them. Seriously, if we'd had this Neto more frequently and them not called him a dumbass, I'd have had a lot fewer problems with the first season. Or later seasons, and including this one, where they inexplicably brought the stupid character interpretation back. This episode, with the return of Kenichi Araki, shows once more why we're on the right track with the cast again, since it really does feed back more to the game interpretation of the series with these two, and why I more easily got on board this than what was going on in the first season. But I digress. It's been a few months of a time-skipping continuity, with Neto showing off the new advanced model PT, which is already in his possession, and in widespread use and promotion over the previous model. Once more tying into that episode last season where Enzon helped out the guy who designed the new optical transmitter, which allows wireless transmission and operation of net navies on the go. A shift in plot points for the series that ends up well appreciated as it no longer tethers our heroes to being stuck in one spot at a time while operating, and it allows them the capacity to be a bit more mobile. Something that is going to be needed soon. Man, the Devil May Cry anime wouldn't even be made for another 4 years yet, and somehow they're referencing it. How does this series keep doing that? We see Mail teasing Neto about the prior battle, with how Neto kept making it look like he would lose to get some entertainment out of it, only to echo the first episode by Chisao, remember I said he was unfortunately sticking around, to echo his brother's crush on Mail in his place since, well, Dekao is already out of the series for the time being, and been moved off to July. This is once more speeding us to establishing the new status quo, as Neto's on his way to Scilab with a care package for Yuichiro, who has finally made progress with his real digitalization research, and is basically living at the labs as a result. The kid seeing the latest progress on the research, and such being overseen by Mr. Famous himself, Meijin. And that being the realization of a Navi as operational equipment for their operator. The operator and Navi in this test being Misaki Goro and Prisman, both of whom were some of the first major original characters for the series. The system, referred to as cross-fusion, was an outreach of tech viewed as required after Yuichiro's prior realization project led viruses into the real world, with intent to use that as a defense against that happening again should others come about to abuse the technology, or if a virus turns such a system rampant. Again. With the eventual payoff being the synchro chip mapping the Navi onto the operator to enhance both in such battles. The problem is, the chip only works in areas where the digital realization tech is running. From this point out, such spaces being referred to as dimensional areas, as their projection of hard light holograms allows those who enter its effect to cross the boundaries of dimensions between virtual computer existence and actual reality. Though I should address something as, despite the type of VR isekai material I reviewed over the years, I don't remember if I've ever actually brought it up, so now is as good a time as any. Virtual reality is not actually a thing, or not in the way a lot of stories in this era tried to use it. In the wake of home computers and tech like that becoming more commonplace, speculative fiction writers began to explore in a lot of places what it meant to exist in a virtual world or as a virtual person. From the really good, like say, the Moriarty episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, to existence after life existing as a hard light hologram in Red Dwarf, or the way you can live your entire life trapped in a simulation, like with the Matrix movies. However, there was also a lot of media about breaching the boundaries of the real and the virtual. And a lot of them were crap because they focused on the reality part of virtual reality's name, as if it's a place where things can really exist. But that's not the important part of the name. Virtual, as in a simulated version of reality where the laws of actual existence do not apply in the same ways, as that existence has been programmed by a person, and thus the parameters they operate under are more flexible than our own. Some others, because of these theories, postulate the simulation theory, that one person's real existence might actually be a simulation operated by someone that exists on a higher order dimension to our own. However, the problem with the crossover on that is, you still actually created a real tangible universe of existence. You just did it by differing means, which operates on its own as a closed system. This depicted in series like Back Arrow or The Big O. So depending on the rules at play, it actually is defined as its own dimension entirely. A Rick and Morty episode from a few years back actually played with this idea as well, though in a pretty cruel means of expressing it. But again, that's less simulation and more playing God on your own terms, because you're actually creating a real self-sustaining, self-governing universe, just from the relative perspective of a god, as opposed to programming something that just runs on strict algorithms. This is different from virtual reality existences, which are, from their beginning, made and meant to interact with someone on the same dimensional tier as one another, as the entire realm they're interacting with is contained, confined, and dependent on a program on a computer operating system to run and continue existence. One that can be taken out of the picture as simply as shutting down the hardware that the software runs on. To be your own universe, your own tangible reality, you can't be constrained by those kinds of things, and it has to have its own self-sustaining, self-functioning system. Give or take stuff like heat death of the universe and entropy, where that's just an internal engine running out of fuel. Or if there's some defined force running things, the mystical machinery of it being clogged or run down. And thus, that's the problem a lot of writers had with this. They didn't understand where to draw the line of where reality with such began or ended. Digimon, I think, is an excellent example of what I'm talking about, as that series is heavily dependent on programming language and data, but defines itself in terms of being a world created when cyberspace and junk data randomly culminate and evolves to the point that such begins to occupy its own dimension space, separate from the computers its data originated from, and resultantly is no longer dependent on them, while the primal existence of such a realm and the creatures in it are still defined by computer coding. Thus, this is where the naming for the series with this tech is both apt and yet also misleading, as the dimensional areas are not actual areas where different dimensions can cross over, in the sense that the two are from differing worlds normally separated by walls between dimensions, as you normally expect from the likes of multiverse theory. Though, ironically, that does end up happening later in the Beyond Art arc, but that's for much later. They're instead just regions where a hologram generation system has been set up so AI programs can be mapped from inside a computer into existing in a three-dimensional environment. It is a holodeck system. It is taking something that normally exists as data, also known as an object that has 0 dimensions to it, and placing that simulated object into a tangible third-dimensional space via a means by which it allows tangible interaction with those that are native to movements and actions within 3 dimensions. Regardless, Yuichiro and Meijin are certain they'll eventually be able to figure out how to do this anywhere with anyone or thing, considering Rush is basically autonomous at this point himself with where and when he's one place or another. They just need to get to a point where they can scientifically replicate how the hell he does that. After that, the sky's the limit on the potential applications. Plot point. For much, much later. Unfortunately, despite Yuichiro getting the synchro chips done properly, the dimensional areas Yuichiro's created are a lot more unstable, and the chips themselves require a synchronization of Navi and operator on a level that is beyond Misaki and Prisman's ability to maintain. The synchro chip is merely a bridge by which to turn the operator's body into a medium for the Navi to manifest itself. Thus, that requires a type of interpersonal bond that Misaki just doesn't have. Neto offers to try it out himself, as due to the program advanced training in the prior season, he and Rockman have the type of synchronous bond the chip is looking for. But to show once more that we're back on track with the series, there is no possible way in hell Yuichiro would ever consider using his son as a guinea pig for experimental technology, especially one that is so draining on an adult to even attempt. Which could have been further extended had the anime timeline acknowledged Rockman as being an AI created by digitalizing the soul of Neto's twin brother, who died as an infant from an illness, but again, as I've discussed before, that's too weighty a subject matter for an animated TV show, despite that being from the video game source material. Censorship standards are always going to be all sorts of screwy. Before Neto could plead a case to help, though, security alarms go off as a Navi attacks, and straight bum rushes through the cybersecurity of Scilab, infesting the facility with viruses. And because this is a tech lab with all sorts of electronics, the fire suppression system is designed to suck all oxygen out of an area to smother fires. So when the Navi's viruses get into that, well, they start sucking the air out of the building. With Misaki and Prisman out cold, only Neto, Mail, Rockman, and Roll are around to address the invasion. Speaking of, why is it none of the scientists are ever shown having their own Navis? You would think Meijin at least would show he has his own Navi, instead of just designing software for them. The animation improvement once more gets shown in spades with this resulting extermination. The elemental chips Rock and Roll make use of actually showing they have areas of effect and splash damage. Water puns. As opposed to just being a quick effect, with actual dynamic showcasing of their asset as the two literally control the field to deal with the numbers they face. However, the thinning air gets to Mail, forcing Roll to log out, and leaving Rockman alone to face the first of our recurring antagonists for this run, Beastman. And unfortunately, all of Rockman's attacks are shown to do no damage to this new enemy, Beastman outing himself as a solo operating net Navi, but one nothing like the prior ones like Bombstone and Freezeman were shown as, or even Forte and Pharaohman. No, Beastman is a Darkloid, a group of self-run AIs that are, in essence, evolved forms of viruses created from the amalgamation of Navi ghost data. But they don't have the time to dwell on that. They need to remove him fast, before the air runs out. And thus...
Battle Chip Cannon High Cannon Mega Cannon Slot In Program Advance 発動 Data Cannon いけ
This gets Beastman to release the system and save them from suffocation. But this isn't the end of this. For you see, Yuichiro is not the only one who has researched dimensional area technology. Well, at least it doesn't look exactly like a Judge satellite from Zoids this time, but they clearly still got the idea for this thing from New Century Zero.
However, あれはまだ実験段階で、ここまでは完成していない。一体誰が？
科学省内でウイルスが実体化して暴れ回っています。まずいな。ガルー！こんなにいるのか。
Well, they're boned. At least if it weren't for Neto's quick thinking. Realizing that if this is a stable dimensional area, and if they had someone with a high Navi synchro ratio...
どこへ行くんだネット。
下だよ。
やめろネット。あれはまだ。
パパは危険だって言ったけど、他に方法がないんだ。
Unfortunately, the bad guys are smart in this section of the show, thus foresaw that possibility. The second Darkloid and longest-acting antagonist for the series, Shademan, stealing all of them to remove the possibility they could be used against them. In fact, this was their entire plan. This raid planned to either kill Yuichiro and stop development of the synchro chips, or steal them all outright and destroy their research to at the very least delay the world governments their ability to openly oppose these Navis and their benefactor who launched the generators that enabled this attack. And since all battle chips are just containers for data, the Navis here can actually virtualize their data for transport instead of them being left behind when the area goes down. It's actually only because Shademan's sloppy and drops a pair of those chips, which seems to be a recurring thing with Shademan, where he doesn't ever seem to notice when he drops something important, that this whole plan falls through, allowing Neto to get his hands on one for use in fighting back, as this just became a Henshin Hero series.
チップスロットインクロスフュージョン
First off, I absolutely love Neto and Rockman's cross-fusion form. It's a simple stylistic change that retains everything of merit to the .exe versus base design, while giving it enough differences to matter and distinguish it from the core Navi's form. The design would go through a few stylistic updates over the remaining seasons as the ability becomes a staple for the long haul. Though honestly, I kind of prefer the second version that's shown in Stream onwards, as the light blue strips balance the colors better, helped with later material having Neto's design becoming a bit more broad-shouldered in the subsequent seasons, as opposed to how lean he is drawn to be here. It's a minor stylistic difference, but one that matters. It's also notable because the invention of the cross-fusion system for the anime here would eventually be back-adapted to the games. Not the Battle Network games, though, but the Star Force ones, where the protagonist, Geostellar, would fuse with the AI Omega Axess to become Star Force Mega Man. So for everyone who likes and appreciates those games, and yes, I do at this time have plans to review them as I've got a DS capture card to do such with, well, you gotta hand it to the anime staff for inventing the concept in the first place. But as is quickly showcased, a human and Navi together like this massively augments their strength and abilities, one covering for the other, with them literally breaking Beastman's claws with the raw power they have to bear.
だったらロックバスター
忘れたか俺にその武器は
チャージショット
If only the charge shot was actually like that in the games, you know? Beastman is forced to flee as the dimensional area shuts down, but just even this quick battle has exhausted Neto, him collapsing on the roof of the devastated Scilab. The wrap-up. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to reset the battleship count between series and tabulate respective totals at the end of each, as otherwise I'm concerned I'll start missing counts between the scripts for these, at least even more than I might have before. We have I Am the Super Beast to Beastman and his army of beast-styled navies. We have Hidden in the Shadows to our regal chief antagonist that has not chosen to reveal himself. We have Incompetent Dragon to Shademan fumbling his part in the plan, thus eventually allowing the heroes of this story to thwart their malicious plans with time. We have Dangerous Forbidden Technique, an actual trope name I'm using for this one, to the prototype synchro chip for its nature as a double-edged sword. So, did anyone who's not seen the show before actually believe me when in my intro video I said how much better the show gets past its first season, especially with the nonsense that went on during it? For let me say it again, this is legitimately night and day with regards to the quality we were getting before. The pacing is better, the storytelling is massively better, the action scenes are better, and the characterization is much better as the flanderization of this slacker child character audience surrogate is completely thrown out here, so we get a Neto that is vastly closer to his video game and manga counterparts than we had been seeing in some time. The same with Yuichiro Hikari as well, as he's no longer being treated as that slacker, never there outside of special occasions, parent we'd been showcased before. Hell, despite how she ends up knocked out of the battle, Male and Roll also get their own chances to step up here as the main pair's battle partners, and are very competent in their backup and interplay, at least until Male's weaker constitution causes her to flag behind. And to be fair to Male, this really doesn't show her as weak, or the show trying to render her an invalid in the moment while pretending to make her more of a badass. As, remember the kind of crap Neto went through and survived in the first season? The kid was burned, frozen, electrocuted, survived having severe sunstroke, was almost drowned, strangled by robots, and regularly beaten up by malfunctioning technology, yet lived to fight another day. Combined with the cardio he gets from traveling everywhere on those skates of his so his lungs have been trained to operate more with less, of course he's going to have a more resolute physical constitution than his best friend that didn't suffer through that, no matter her own state or physical capability. Beyond that, different people's bodies and brains handle stress, damage, and changes to the environment differently. I personally have a pretty strong tolerance for pain, but by proxy because of lung damage I got from pneumonia, I am more susceptible to things like air quality and oxygen density than others might be, and actually have suffered blackouts when I've gone to some conventions simply because the density of people drops the air quality too much for me to stay conscious, as I can't get the oxygen I need to breathe when too many other people are around. So honestly, even in these same circumstances, I'd be like Mail in such a situation myself and pass out once the air thinned too much. And this also has nothing on the villains and their motivations, which aren't even revealed in the episode. This is just the first strike we're made aware of in their operation. And in one move, they have already all but crippled their opposition besides 2 synchro chips they missed. And let's be honest here, Neto collapsing immediately after use of one shows immediately why only 2 people using them is not a huge threat to them. Or so they think. In comparison to what they have waiting in the wings, and their own army of agents we've not seen yet. The episode literally ends in the best place it could have for not just getting our attention, but keeping it until the next episode airs the following week to continue impressing the merits of the new status quo and the shift in dynamics. It's unfortunate though that when the series was dubbed, this episode aired alone months before the actual series it was part of was to follow. So people ended up not caring. Yeah, I've addressed this before, but it needs to be restated. Kids WB's airing of this series as Mega Man NT Warrior Axess completely trashed it in the West. This episode was aired as a promotional push to advertise the rest of the series that was coming, but it took almost 4 full months until they actually started airing any of the episodes that followed it. The interim filled with more of the episodes from the first season played out of order, most of which were either terrible, or the ones that gave context to ones they'd released earlier that were worthless in this broadcast form, that just swallowed the reality that there was anything better on the horizon. Especially as by this point, the script writing for the dub localization of the episodes had gotten better. Ironically, because all of the scripts for the Axess episodes that were dubbed, yeah, they were actually written by the voice acting icon himself, Steve Bloom. Mega Man Axess, due to these delays, resultantly did not do well in ratings in the West, despite the success Axess actually did see in Japan. Not helped that it was shoved into the weekday death slot to just languish in obscurity as Kid WB's final year of airing ran its course, to the detriment and ridiculously long delay over what could have been. Since by the time it finally started airing regularly, Mega Man Battle Network 5 was released, when by proxy, the 4th game this anime tied into would not see release for a few months yet with regards to the Japanese release of both. It's a delay in airing in the West of 18 months, and especially with how negatively Battle Network 4 was received, which Axess's popularity had actually been a huge component in the advertisement of that game in Japan, which helps explain why it sold so well. Well, the Western release missed its best opportunity to get the goodwill it needed to survive, or get more seasons past Axess dubbed due to how bad the delay was. I'm honestly less bitter about this than I used to be, especially since, well, when going through these episodes it shows that Wolfpack Productions subs also took a significant leap in quality all around. But it's helped that the dub of Axess was actually rather good, especially for its time and nature, as it didn't try to erase the reality of the situation the cast were going through or make them farcical. No, unlike what happened with the first season, they mostly did right by the series, or some episodes that weren't imported. So these days, at least we have the fan sub, even if it's unlikely we'll ever get the series on home video. Who knows, maybe Viz will change their mind. But yeah, getting to this episode and this sect of the series, and the generally good memories I have of it going forward, bar some still bad episodes here and there, after the inconsistent quality of the first season where good episodes were few and far between, it's like having to suffer through the bad camp of the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers to get to the generally good content in its later sequential seasons like Zeo, that is worth someone's time to experience because of the culmination that results, which is greater than the individual pieces that go into it, especially in spite of how garbage the early stuff could be. If you were all getting sick of me being negative at this show before, well, congratulations. This is where I start to enjoy myself a lot more. At least outside of certain episodes where certain writers try to drag it back down to being flanderized dreck. But this right here and the quality showcased is what I really did want to showcase for you all. Neto wakes up the following day still completely drained. Haruka cooking up a veritable feast to help him regain his lost strength. But Neto finds his PT, and Rockman are MIA. Both were taken by Yuichiro in order to analyze the data on it, and to hopefully reduce the strain on his son, as unfortunately it looks like Neto is the only one available who can work to stop the threat they're facing, which he is reporting directly to the government the danger of. This introduces the next of the new supporting cast for Axess, Commander Seishin Kifune and Superintendent Rin Manabe of the Net Police, who are taking this attack very seriously after the damage 2 realized navies and their viruses did to one of the world's most advanced research institutes. And they don't have any good suspects, as Dr. Wily has not been seen since the Gospel incident. Hate to stereotype, but have you checked any homeless shelters? Plot point. Worse, the synchro chips are made from extremely rare metals. So even when Scilab is back up and running and Yuichiro is able to manufacture more chips, the problem is going to be supply-based on whether he'll even be able to get more of the raw materials for them. And despite Kifune's urgings, well, when the perpetrators behind this next strike, they're only going to have precious few options in dealing with this crisis. Neto makes it back to Scilab, Yuichiro finishing his test to make sure Rockman wasn't damaged from an improper use of the synchro chips, though there has unfortunately been some damage from it since Rockman is a heavily customized Navi. The synchro chips interfaced with his ultimate program that causes his form changes and adaptation abilities, and resultantly, while it helped make cross-fusion more workable for them, it has irreparably corrupted Rockman's ability to use style change. Not the biggest loss considering the limitations of those forms, but still a disabled arsenal is a disabled arsenal. Honestly though, half of that is my rationalization for it, since it's not quite explicable why inserting a battle chip that turns a Navi and their PET into an armored suit for the operator would disable a form change system. But as we're soon to see in another few episodes, it didn't remove the programs by which Rockman changes forms to adapt to situations, merely made it go dormant as it too evolved from environmental exposure. Plus, to go back to what I said about bug style in the Battle Network 3 reviews, and that bug style is a corrupted hub style in wake of hub style's exposure to the Gospel Bug Beast, it would have made more sense for the first season to end on the climax of the battle with Gospel, to then remove style change as something possible for Rockman to use after bug style went rampant. Such could have been written to have corrupted the system from within. But because it isn't the last event, but instead Aqua Custom Style fighting the life virus is, well, they had to write some explanation for why Rockman couldn't use the form. And the data being corrupted, that's the best we're likely to get, especially with its replacement quickly approaching. Yuichiro also warns him that it's his bond with Rockman that made cross-fusion possible, not any innate talent, so it is up to them to keep their bond strong if they're to use it in the future. The elder man knowing that he likely won't be able to keep his son from interceding in what is to come.
クロスフュージョンはまだ実験段階だ。ディメンショナルエリア以外での実体化は無理だ。
This also helps lock off use of the form and ability so it doesn't get spammed in general use, allowing the writing team to be a bit more selective about what threat does what, when, so their story assets can shift around as needed, instead of making it immediately about everything being capable of showing up in the real world at any time. No, they wait until stream to have that sort of escalation, while still maintaining the limitations about the synchro chip. Unfortunately, the importance of everything that's happened, and Rockman not being around to act as a reminder, has led Neto to forget a promise to Chisao he races off to address, and in doing so, slips the synchro chip into his pocket, forgotten until after he's long gone that he even has it. And it's a good thing too, as Beastman now has a grudge against the pair, which Shademan lets fester in the depths of the internet as they plan their next operation. Meanwhile, Neto's promise to Chisao was acting as his chaperone as the younger kid wanted to take part in a tour of the facility that houses the Net City supercomputer and server. Though considering it's just a server facility with a fancy TV for looking at the place from above, I don't see the big deal. Especially since this is all stuff we were told 20-ish episodes ago. Well, at least until the plot of Independence Day starts up. No, seriously, the next operation of the big new bad guys involves a gigantic flying saucer swooping into Net City and proceeding to demolish the place, taking in all the raw data and navies for its own use. I'm actually a bit baffled that none of the Taken tried to log out the second it showed up, but then again, this isn't exactly a setting where people are that genre savvy or think they need to run away from such a threat. Of course, since Neto's on hand at the server facility, he and Mail asked to help in the crisis, and they're authorized to use battle chips within the server. While they're able to save a few navies from being victims, it's simply too big a threat that is attacking so impartially for them to easily deal with it. Even getting inside the thing doesn't reveal an easy means of stopping it or reversing the damage, as it's just a drone remote controlled from somewhere else. And worse, it's defended by viruses in such numbers that they've never seen before, especially on their own. Rockman's forced to make a tactical retreat, only for him to be ambushed by Beastman, who's made a full recovery, forcing Rockman to, for the first time in the series, be jacked out in order to prevent his own deletion. Worse, their benefactor sends out another dimensional area to prevent any other attempt to stop them, Neto tripping over one of Rush's warp holes, and the sinker chip falling out of his pocket, this becoming the Chekhov's gun of the episode. With a reminder to slot a supply of chips before triggering fusion this time, the pair are fully equipped to fight the realized viruses. At least until their supply of chips and memory runs out, as the active memory of the advanced PET can only remember 5 for the time being.
レッドガードゴールドフィストブーメラン
And yeah, they forgot to add the sound effect for the armaments changing there. It seems like this was also missed in the DVD releases of the series, as I have the DVD RAWs of the series as well, since Wolfpack subbed the series with the broadcast version, and sometimes there is differences between those, so I wonder who dropped the ball. Using the tried and true steel and sword combo, Neto forces Beastman to retreat, saving everyone trapped inside the facility. But unfortunately, it is a Pyrrhic victory, as Beastman's attack, once more, was a distraction. The UFO Shademan sent out has taken all the data it stole, and reformatted it into a floating castle hovering above the ruined Net City, the domain by which Shademan, with his benefactor's assistance, will claim the defeat of humanity itself.
我らダークロイドが世界を支配するのだ。Maniacal laugh. Maniacal laugh. Maniacal laugh.
Back at Scilab, Yuichiro officially hands off the synchro chip to his son when he tries to return it, once more acknowledging that he won't be able to stay out of trouble, especially since this second incident has caught Kifune's eye. Thus, they are asking Neto to work with them to stop this new threat as an official deputized Net Saver, romanized as Net Savior for some reason in the subtitles. And I don't see why. They clearly say Net Saver here. I checked the kana for the word, and it's still Net Saver in Japanese. And when the show was dubbed, they still kept it as Net Saver. But yeah, the job is basically the same as the one you saw Enzan, aka Chod, take up in the games as an official net battler. Neto's ability has been officially recognized by the government and will be tasked with interceding in the schemes of this new faction, since giving him official license to act in special circumstances despite being a kid is a hell of a lot more direct an approach than the nonsense Mesa kept pulling last season. Then again, there is all sorts of moral and ethical quandaries invoked by giving a kid who hasn't been formally trained and doesn't know the specifics of law, suspect pacification, and conflict resolution the keys to do what he wants. But then again, the police the last few years who have gone through all that have shown they don't know it either. And at least all Kifune and Rin are asking him to do is to go after navies that show themselves an active threat to everyone, as opposed to telling him to attack random individuals on sight. So really, it's not much different from what he was already doing, it's just now he has official backing of government officials, as opposed to just being a good Samaritan that gets wrapped up in these incidents by chance. Still, Neto gets that this is a big responsibility, and one that he's going to have to live up to going forward. The wrap-up. We have the day the Earth stood still, to the citizens of Net City for just standing around as a UFO attacked them. We have Grappling Hook, to roll using a yo-yo battle chip as that tool to save the little girl Navi. We have One Punch Man, to Neto breaking out the Gold Fist of Doom to knock out Beastman. It's too bad it wasn't a Silver Fist to be even more thematically appropriate, but I'm concerned if it had been, then it would have called out a Monsieur or a Grandpa to argue over it. We have Castlevania. No, not that one. To the series resident Alucard XP assembling his castle and personal domain. We have Serve the Public Trust, Protect the Innocent, Uphold the Law. To Neto and Rockman being deputized by the police to act on their behalf in net battle matters. We have, hey, you ever wonder why you're here? To Chisao asking to go on this tour of the server facility. Like, I kind of get it for some of the later plots where it's just coincidence that Neto can intercede, but this one seemed especially odd despite it being the first major Encounter of the Week event because it's a pre-arranged thing. In the future, the Dark Lloyds either target Neto, or there's some tip-off to the Dark Lloyd's activities that lead to them crossing paths. We have the Bat and the Wolf, to Shademan and Beastman's use in this story, and by proxy the last, but we didn't have full context to that then, by making them out to be XPs of Dracula and the servant pet interpretation of the Wolfman who guards over his master. I actually didn't see that interpretation of things the last time I went through this series, but that makes much more sense to me now that I have read and seen more media that involves the classic literary and Universal movie monsters like this. And it's another way that the anime series better takes advantage of the usable Navi rosters that would populate the games. Considering a lot of the Battle Network 3 and Network Transmission exclusive Navis that haven't been used in the series yet, because that content hadn't released yet for the anime to use them, now get their chance to shine as part of the Dark Lloyds, or become relevant throughout the story because of the Dark Lloyd's antics. Which also helps to round out that roster because, yeah, in the games, the Dark Lloyds consist of Shademan, Laserman, a lot of heal navies, and then the bosses of Battle Network 5. It's not exactly a lot of agents by which to view them as a big, credible threat in comparison to World 3 or Gospel before them. Especially because they have dark chips and dark souls that would allow them to corrupt other navies to do their bidding. This, though, flips that script entirely, and the series is better for it. This concludes the primary setup for the new status quo the series will run with and the long arc it has to resolve. After all, everyone that was abducted now needs to be saved. And a lot of stuff operated out of net cities that now has messed up the net something awful. We know more about our antagonists' goals and the resources available to them, and what they can use those resources to do, while also in turn providing a means by which to fight them and a support system to back Neto up. This is once more the competent storytelling I expect from Kenichi Araki to provide, and to go back to what I said about the man leaving Toei and never returning to them, what the man wanted to do for Toei, only for inept producers to prevent and hamstring him from doing them, which would have been well received and a boon to their productions. With Axess, it really is made clear that the upper echelons were finally letting him off the leash to doing more original storytelling that nonetheless feels consistent to the world and character. And we're going to have some fun with this ride. At least for the most part, for Bubble, Toil and Trouble, does a wishy-washy comic relief nuisance enter the picture next time. We return to the series with Katsuhiko Chiba's first episode on this show, joining the writing cast from Axess onwards as I discussed before. And unfortunately, it starts as many of the previous bad episodes do, with characters blaming and lambasting Neto for things that are not his fault, as Miss Mariko's class is out on a field trip, with Neto being tardy. This episode also confirms the timeline for events, with the group officially being in the 6th grade at this point, so Neto's a 12-year-old secret agent. A spy kid, if you will. But yeah, they're on a field trip to the waterworks, and Neto being late results in an argument between him and Rockman, who didn't succeed in getting him up. Again, I know I keep beating this over the head, but alarm clock function, install it! Hell, this one is actually so sensitive and malfunctioning that even when I dismiss them, the alarms still go off. It actually botched the recording of this episode previously. Now, unlike previous episodes where I savaged them over flanderizing Neto into a generic idiot protagonist just to bash on the guy unfairly, well again, this is being written by Katsuhiko Chiba, who has a better track record with such, and it's actually being used for a purpose within this narrative. Neto does have a bad habit of forgetting things and being late, but this isn't being used to berate the kid, and instead is being utilized as an avenue for a story as a good writer should. And the show in the first season didn't. What this is doing is creating an argument between Neto and Rockman that puts them both in a sour mood and being unwilling to work in sync with one another due to this temporary divide. And hey, that happens. Friends and family have natural ups and downs in their relationships depending on the day. And this is one where Neto is having an off day, and Rockman is exasperating it, so Neto is in turn abrasive. Anyone can experience that. This is then creating a conflict in the story that needs to be resolved. As remember, their ability to maintain a cross-fusion form with help of the synchro chip is dependent on their synchronicity and the bond they share. If the bond they bear is damaged or in turmoil, cross-fusion fails. And this isn't coming in out of nowhere. Yuichiro talked about this exact thing happening in the last episode as a built-in flaw with the system. As without a bond with the being you fuse with, why would it work when it's meant to take advantage of a bond in the first place? It wouldn't. Thus, Chiba is showcasing a scenario early on in the storyline about the synchro chips and how the users of them have to put their own personal egos and issues aside in the moment if they want to be able to use them, and maintaining a positive bond with their navis in the midst of a crisis. And this is something you could successfully do in a story like this with a child protagonist, as children through their teenage years don't have a great handle on throttling back their emotions and biting their tongue. Hell, adults fail at this often themselves without strict disciplinary training, or sometimes even because of that. So because Neto hasn't been taught self-discipline for matters like these, it's expected for him to be more raw in the midst of his argument and things to not go as expected. Thus, this uses Neto's bad habits not to bash him, with no actual attempt to resolve them or make him work to improve himself to not repeat them in the future, or at least make an honest attempt to be better, but actually shows and provides an object lesson on why self-improvement is needed and his bond with Rockman needs to be maintained. Instead of such being a detriment to the show as it was in the prior season, it uses this storytelling as an asset, and, once more to contrast the prior execution, uses it as an asset to the narrative of the series. And with all of that brought about, by many people's choice for worst Dark Lloyd NetNavi, Bubble Man. And again, to call back to my Battle Network 3 review, I hate this jackass. So him being used for this, it is smart, as audiences are already against the guy, so the show is giving us a reason to hate on him, as opposed to it being the consequence of game mechanics and the evil sadist stuff from before. This happens because the field trip Mari's class went on was to the waterworks, a surprising one considering Mail and Neto were there the prior year to deal with one of Madoi's plots, with Dr. Freud even cameoing here and leading their tour, which also feeds into the theme of the episode with him talking about personal responsibility by proxy of the reality that AI can't do everything, and manual labor still needs to be used to maintain any engineering marvel humans may ever fashion for themselves. An element of reality that I really wish a certain idiot plot at the tail end of the .hack storytelling had actually remembered. As if they had, it would have actually derailed the entire idiot plot. This is where Bubble Man comes in, redirecting the water flow in the pipes to spike the water pressure to the point it begins to break all the pipes in the network. Which isn't quite how those things work, as water pressure is usually restricted by the size of the pipe and the quality of its construction, i.e. whether it resists corrosion, but there are some cases where water under heavy pressure can rupture and erupt out of fixtures to have them break everything within sects of a system. It is usually used for practical humor in comedies. However, here's where we get something I just generally don't like. Neto keeping his status as a net saver a secret from everyone not already in the know. Specifically, male. And there is a specific reason I don't like it. It is completely pointless, and buying into an outdated trope about superhero identities that's completely unnecessary in this setting. Male's been out there helping him in a lot of these incidents. There is no reason to keep her out of the loop. Furthermore, their enemies already know who he is, and they're not exactly being subtle about their attacks. Are they seriously going to try and cover up the fact that they deputized a 12-year-old kid to help fight the Darkloid threat? 'Cause at this point, there's no reason to keep something like this secret. And it's not like he even manages to keep it secret for that long as it is. I kind of get why despite this, though. Male can't use a synchro chip by which to perform cross-fusion, yet. Thus, her or anyone following along with him is only going to put herself and any others that follow her in danger. And as Neto's fighting solo, he won't be able to defend them and get them out of the line of fire in a very dangerous situation that could lead to more than them suffering. It would be smart for him to try and head that off by keeping them out of it. What isn't smart is Neto not talking to her about it to try and explain it, as she's already been part of 2 previous incidents that didn't go bad because Neto unofficially stepped up. And now that he has, well, it's an act of responsibility in contrast to what the episode itself is showcasing with Neto and part of his character growth. He certainly made a mistake, and the show itself has as well, by buying into this old-as-dirt trope, but it's certainly one that's for the right reasons. Why I don't like it is, well, there's never any guarantee that where fights break out will be devoid of people. So if Nail were informed of what's going on, she could help Neto get anyone in harm's way out of the danger zone so he could fight unheeded. There's a whole pros and cons table for this certainly, but I just don't like unstated reasons for actions like this, as they tend to blow up in people's faces in the worst ways possible. Plus, he is not told to keep his net saver status secret from the wider population, as he needs to use his net saver credentials to get into places to stop Darkloid threats. He is only specifically keeping it secret from his friends. Thus, he needs a valid reason for them to not be in the loop. In some regards, this is a carryover from my utter loathing of the Commander Beef subplot from the first season, in that it was completely worthless to the larger story and put up unnecessary artificial barriers between characters that prevented their proper interactions, growth, and character development. And Neto doing the same is not appealing to me in the slightest, as damn it, the kid's better than that. Regardless, Meijin is his supervisor and contact for the net savers, and gives him the details of the water pipe breakdowns that leads him into conflict with Bubbleman in the depths of the waterworks, once more compounded by the security robots the waterworks featured previously, which then shut down the second they see Neto's net saver credentials, allowing them at Bubbleman's viruses. I'll puku you, you stupid little... He gets his... Also, credit to Wolfpack Productions' old subs on this. I actually like it when translators leave in characters' verbal tics like this. It adds to the characterization of the individual with the tic, and the sound symbol equivalent for this used in the games, blub, just never sounded right to me, as that's not a proper onomatopoeia for the sound of a bubble popping. Yes, that is the beginning and end of his plan. You see why I hate this idiot? Though again, to the episode's credit, Bubbleman is such an incompetent bad guy that the only legitimate way to make him come off as a threat to our heroes is in an episode where their normally amazing teamwork is completely shot to hell. Though here is where we get another oddity of the Dimensional Area story engine, in that this time, instead of being launched from orbit, the Dimensional Area generators appear out of dimensional holes and embed themselves into existing structures. Now, as I said before, the Dimensional Area generators, also known as the Dimensional Area converters, are not actually creating a space that bridges dimensions. They are an area where hard-like holograms can be constructed out of data and act as a physically realized object. That doesn't exactly work when the generators themselves are program data that are themselves manifested, or alternatively use digital warp holes as a means by which to teleport them to a new location, as that is technically explicable and happens much later in the series where things are turned back and forth into real objects and data, despite not being data first. We have technically already seen that a bit with how the synchro chips were stolen. However, the show already has an out for that, which acts as an excuse. Rush. As again, Rush does this exact thing to transition himself between cyberspace and the real world. And no one really grasps how he does it, as it's not exactly an ability he was programmed to have. Dimensional area converters, when they manifest like this, seem to follow the same logic as his warp holes, and that these generators are data facsimiles of the real ones programmed to cross over temporarily to set up an area and act as a bridge to realization, or going from real object to digital object and then back again once they've reached their target destinations. But that just invokes the logic of, if they have the technology and programming skills to do this, then why rely on the dimensional area generators at all? Why not just let all navies have that ability? Well, funny story. It's actually explained in stream that something else has this exact program to transition data entities into the real world without use of the dimensional areas, and the Dark Lord's benefactor is aware of how to work it. He just didn't give them the outright ability to do it themselves, as he is using them, and they need to stay strapped to a leash that is his control over these fields. Later uses past that, which freely transition real and virtual entities back and forth, are then taking advantage of established uses in continuity to build upon something seemingly ludicrous, but by what was done before, not appearing to be so as a result. It's again an example of something that might seem as problematic or a plot hole or story problem in isolation, but when you look at the larger story around it, it is not actually shown to be, nor treated as such. Now, unfortunately, as once more Neto and Rockman are at odds and Neto's been having a bad day, with Bubbleman manifesting itself right in front of them, Neto is in a rush to get this all over with, and not listening to Rockman about trying to deal with Bubbleman's sabotage first, before fighting him mano a mano. However, this is once more a case where Neto isn't wrong. They've seen from Beastman's attacks on them the threat a realized Navi is, so wanting to fusion up right away to deal with him is an appropriate response. The problem, and an understandable one considering Neto's age and relative experience, is the logical thing to do is not always the right thing to do in a situation. Sometimes there will be other priorities that trump dealing with the actual active threat, which is Bubbleman gaining control over the waterworks' entire sewage system. For that was still in progress and Rockman wasn't able to end. And also because they are new at this, well, Neto forgot to slot any battle chips into the PT's active memory. Again, Neto is just having an off day. To be fair, this would be only the third time he's used cross-fusion, so he wouldn't have exactly gotten the muscle memory for that yet. We also get another question answered when Neto is told to try indirect methods of fighting Bubbleman. Why not just destroy the dimensional area converters to shut these guys out? And again, the answer is simple. Anything made manifest by the dimensional area generation system will obviously not be able to damage the source of what creates it, as it is projecting the field outwards from it. The second it would go through the casing of the generator, whatever would attack it would then resultantly vanish as it's just a hologram. And the casing for these converters are solid enough that nothing that was physically there in the real world that they could get their hands on would likely be able to smash enough of the generators by which to shut down the fields. I mean, it's not like they have on hand heavy explosives, and I doubt just breaking the buildings to use the rubble to crush them would be a viable alternative. This is where in contiguity with the episode, cross-fusion failed, which I showcased before. Neto additionally forgetting to log out Rockman, making it so he had to take the long way back to Neto's PET to try again, during which Neto's left at Bubbleman's mercy. And it gives Neto a chance to see he was in the wrong all on his own, the faith each has in the other re-establishing their bond, as Neto tries to make up for the inability to cross-fuse in the interim by trying to stall Bubbleman all on his own. This also helps to show that, While Beastman is by far the weakest and most incompetent of the Dark Lloyds, even just one of them is a threat and outmatches a normal human in all ways, once more emphasizing the importance of cross-fusion as the asset it is.
お前の力が必要なんだ。 この借りは絶対返すだったか。
With Beastman's retreat, the Waterworks controls are restored, with Neto and Rockman having learned the lesson the episode was meant to teach, that they can't afford to be at odds with everything going on. And at the very least going forward, informed is forewarned. The wrap-up. We have, it turns out, I'm the asshole, for Neto and Rockman being at odds throughout the episode. We have toilet humor, to Beastman wanting to prank people with exploding toilets. The irony of that plot being that it's actually better than a lot of other toilet humor plots I could name, and this is in spite of me hating the character. Not help that this plot, yeah, I actually experienced it myself when my house had a sewage backup due to a tree growing into my sewage line. We have tick, 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 to Beastman's verbal tick. Yes, Chisao has one too, but his is not in every sentence, whereas it's overflowing, with the demented scuba man. We have callback to the Waterworks security drones last seen like 50 episodes ago. And we have Peter Parker syndrome for needlessly keeping one's secret identity from their loved ones in hopes of them staying out of danger. It didn't work for Spider-Man, it will not work for Neto. Once again, we've got a good episode pushing the plot forward in, as I said, showcasing the limitations of this new tech and setting up rules for the conflict the show would subsequently follow. After all, if they never showed a bond being frayed, it wouldn't present well the flaw in the synchrochips. If we didn't see a normal human fail against a realized Navi, we might assume that they could be fought conventionally. And if Neto didn't try and ever damage a dimensional converter, we might just assume the show is being stupid by never making the attempt against all reason. Unfortunately, all these points would be refuted in a later bad episode of the series, but it just goes to show that early on, with the good writers on the show, they were making the attempt to resolve and showcase why that would not be so. I did a back and forth on several of these issues in discussion of this episode, simply because I saw way back that these were critiques of the series at this point, as not everyone was on board the shift to this being more of a henshin hero battle anime from the cyberspace adventure one it was before. But again, I have to chalk some of that up to people seriously not paying attention to the media they ingest and what it's actually doing, intentionally or no, which may or may not explain these issues. Some of these, like the dimensional area converters popping up out of cyberspace like they did, were fair ones at the time, and only truly fixed by later lore expansions in Stream and Beast, which once more showed the story writers were not unawares of the issue, and wrote in an answer that felt natural to the perception of an expanding narrative as opposed to a retcon. Beastman, as much as I hate him though, does not get his just desserts in this episode. His fall comes later, and he was used well here as the worst Dark Lloyd in allowing what was addressed in this episode to see spotlight. So I can't exactly be overcritical of the guy here. I just hate him on principle at this point. But at the very least, his plan failed, and the toilets of the world shall not be used for evil on this day. Wow, that is a line. Did I actually write that? Jeez, the stuff you encounter when you're doing the internet reviewer gig. It is time! This episode, ironically enough, comes to us once more from Kenichi Yamada, and it immediately shows it by padding its length by replaying the commercial from the advanced PT models in full just to fill time. Plus, it seems to shift things back to the older paradigm somewhat, with Flashman appearing to short-circuit electronics all throughout the city, and causing a situation where people can be not just blinded with overcharged lights, but electrocuted. This causes Meijin to call Neto out of class to investigate, with Mail seeing him try and sneak off. She eavesdrops on Meijin giving Neto his marching orders, And just like I said about how Neto handled this before, it causes her to try and get involved instead of informing her of it so she could stay out of the worst of harm's way. Then again, this episode more shows why she probably would not have listened, as she's back to being in her expected standard range of tsundere. But that is pretty much the point of this episode and resultantly the evolving arc. The big flaw of the whole Peter Parker syndrome mess, with how superheroes handle their secret identities, is it's been shown time and again that you can't effectively protect the people you love by keeping them at a distance. It's a defense mechanism that becomes a crippling crutch for many of them, as they come to regret not telling them, as it only further puts them in danger that they're then oblivious to. And that's especially true right now, since Neto's the only one that can perform cross-fusion to fight the Dark Lloyds in a setting where operators like Mail are so used to handling cyber threats on their own or in tandem with their friends. So, her stepping back as she needs to? It's not easy for her to accept or realize, even as Neto and Rockman track Flashman down. Then again, since Flashman's modus operandi for his attacks involves spiking the brightness of all lights in a local network, it's not that hard to track him down. See, now I'm just wondering why he never tried to do that in the games when he got cycled into harder difficulties. A light barrier makes sense for a light-themed Navi. And that light barrier is strong, a longsword not even making a dent in the damn thing. Which is where Roll intercedes. For as said, Mail followed him, oblivious to what she was getting into. And how easily Roll could be deleted fighting the Dark Lloyds while still thinking this is either a standard Navi skirmish or something of the likes they'd seen with World 3 or Gospel. Yeah, using water chips against an electric-type Navi, not the smartest of things since this isn't a universe where that'd cause him to short-circuit. Well, then I think Yuichiro fixed that defect with the hologram emitters. Worse, this causes friendly fire, forcing Rockman to log out and Flashman to get away free, allowing Flashman to return to Shademan with reports of his progress, and receive a token of appreciation for his work. Another sign of Battle Network's storyline being introduced before those games actually were released. For this is where they introduced the tool that gives the Dark Lloyds not only their name, but immense power, the Dark Chip. Neto takes Rockman in to recover at Scilab, and it's here where Mail's finally tipped off to what's going on, and is remorseful for her part in this. However, something abnormal is found in Rockman's data, as Yuichiro runs the recovery programs. Seems his ultimate program has not been idle, and the repeated use of cross-fusion has generated more abnormal data that Rockman's working to assimilate, and the damage he took from Flashman has brought that to a head. Unfortunately, with Flashman back on the attack, it causes a power failure at Scilab in the midst of this, making Mail try to make up for a screw-up by holding Flashman off long enough for Yuichiro to finish Rockman's repair, even as the Dark Chip just being passively in Flashman's possession, increasing his ability to hijack electronics to unheard-of levels, as the entire city's lighting system is taken over simultaneously. Both fortunately and unfortunately, Mail and Roll have actually gotten used to fighting opponents above their pay grade, thus show off what solo Navis have time and again been shown to be their weakness. They're completely incapable of using tactics and are generally too straightforward with emphasizing power, not strategy. Thus, a tactical support fighter, holding an enemy off for the heavy hitters to intercede, that is her wheelhouse. The problem is incapacitating enemies on such a stronger tier that their heavy hitter friends struggle to damage them. Yeah, no, they're not winning this on their own, no matter the tactics they employ. But again, they don't need to win here. They just have to hold out for reinforcements to finally arrive at the last possible moment.
許さないお前だけは残念ソードゴールちゃんの分
Type weakness attack bonus, bitch! However, this is where we see Flashman pull out the Dark Chip, and we witness what it actually does in this incarnation of the series. As was discussed before with the review of Battle Network 4, we saw two types of Dark Chips in play in that game. First, we had the ones that appeared in the custom window that appeared as super powerful, dark variants of existing battleships, Dark Sword, Dark Lance, etc., etc. These types of dark chips would later be seen as the standard dark chips we'd look to collect and find for the black market sellers in Battle Network 5 as well. However, there is a second type that were actually the first ones we saw, which in Battle Network 4 was responsible for the creation of a Dark Soul that could freely generate the standard battle chip Dark Chips. And as Battle Network 4 had not released yet, and the production staff were working off of production notes for Battle Network 4 with these things, this is presently the type we see most prominently in Axess. The Dark Soul Dark Chips acting as a massive power-up to the Navi that uses them, both passively by their mere possession, but also actively when a Navi possessing them installs the data, it appearing to remove all of their weaknesses and ramping up their abilities even farther. The chips also seem to make their users more reckless, drunk of the rush they experience, and putting the protagonist Navis on the ropes, until Roll tries to sacrifice herself to save Rockman, which triggers the new evolution of Rockman's ultimate program via the resonance of their souls. So does anyone else find it kind of ironic that the Soul form that was considered so good that it was banned from Battle Network 4 tournaments is the first Soul Unison form Rockman in the anime gains access to? Like, usually series with form change abilities ramp up to the stupidly powerful broken forms to avoid the Lensman arms race escalation. And they sure show their worth in their first outing as Roll Soul fully recovers Rockman's health and improves his capabilities to counter the Dark Soul enhanced Flashman, with a single arrow used in counterattack, which deletes the dark chip from his system. Though I don't think they really recognize what that does at this time. With Flashman forced into retreat, they take this back to Ichiro, who gives the pair the lowdown on this new ability Neto and Rockman now have to call on. And hey, Lensman's arms race is actually mostly avoided by the use of the soul forms in the anime, as they try to balance these forms a bit better in that their personal, unique capabilities that adapt Rockman to a given situation is far better addressed with their ability to freely use the forms at any time after they are acquired, Neto loading each soul form program into a slottable battle chip, which means I need to keep track of their use. Crap. The wrap-up. We have a 2-in-1 hero, in a literal sense, with Rockman and Roll literally fusing for the first use of Roll Soul. We have put your heart and soul into it, for the birth of the Soul Unison system. As I've said about the system, it's a very good and well-appreciated idea that floundered in Battle Network 4's use of it due to a combination of so many bad or scarce elemental battle chips, making many of the souls just unusable over others, and their abilities not making the cut for use over the chips themselves in the game. The anime doesn't have that limitation, and their free use gives them a lot more versatility to hot swap between them when the battles are at their hardest while still in cyberspace. We have light so bright we need to throw shade, to the irony of Flashman, whose entire motive is based around light, using a dark chip to enhance his light powers. There's something to be said about the brightest light shining in the deepest darkness, and without darkness light cannot shine, but I'm pretty sure they didn't mean them like this. Unlike several other of the Kenichi Yamada scripts we've had before, this one's a generally good episode, though he still struggles with actually explaining, you know, why things happen in a given episode from a character action and motivation perspective. This one's more coming off as a Monster of the Week style adventure, which is simultaneously frustrating and expected of him, considering Yamada was also the man who gave us the prototype of the later introduced Dark Chip in the first season with Roll going all Dark Empress, and was also the one who ended up seeding the evolution of the storytelling in the series with his Rush Bio emerges into the real world as an independent Hardlight hologram story as well. Now, he introduces yet another new, plot-central thing that throws the dynamics for the show in a new direction after the prior episodes bringing in a new status quo, and in turn adding to that status quo with the addition, and yet there's not much given on why that is, and why Mail and Roll act the way they do. Now, as I was getting into, there is context from the prior episodes for why that is, which is at the very least giving hand-waved one-off explanatory lines that someone paying attention would actually catch. Specifically, that Cross Fusion's reliance on a bond caused the adaptation ability that is central to Rockman's ultimate program to begin to apply that same trait, the importance of a bond, to creating new style change forms for Rockman that supersede in versatility and power the previous style changes he had. And Mail's actions here are better contextualized by Neto not telling her what's going on, so she steps into things blind. But the episode is actually over-reliant on that context brought by serialized continuity, since those specifics are never stated to actively inform both on the why that is. Coupled with, once more, the garbage release of this show and the West mangling observing this series as actually being serialized continuity to these things. And yeah, Western markets were once again not on board this stuff as they otherwise could have been. It's still a step up from what we had before from this guy and the series, and puts another important piece in play for the storytelling going forward, as Neto and Rockman are now free to collect Soul Unison power-ups from their friends, allies, rivals, and frenemies. At least the ones that appeared in Battle 4 and to a lesser extent 5. Stupid decision-making that kept all but Gyro Soul of the Battle 5 exclusives out of the show. Yeah, I actually have no idea why Knight, Magnet, Shadow, Tomahawk, Napalm, Medi, Toad, and Conal Souls didn't actually end up getting used in the series. But in turn, without those important additions to the narrative, it's otherwise a forgettable episode with Flashman not even getting a motivation or reason to why he's overloading every line in the real world, nor much attention paid to the character dynamics on why this would suddenly create a soul form or trigger Soul Unison in the first place at this point in time. Again, there's a single line that infers Mail and Neto have been friends since forever, which actually is followed up on in a later episode focused around the two's relationship. But here, it's the same sort of there to handwave why it happens in the story, as opposed to the story hinging on those dynamics and relationships, which is why it is forgettable. It's a tale more focused on events than character to put something out there, instead of the character dynamics playing off of each other being why things occur. To its credit, it does all this by keeping the cast of characters in the range of actions they would do normally to make it all come about, just without real impetus for why they would in each instance. I have seen worse where an event occurring requires the sacrifice or contradiction of character to make it happen, but here, it's part of why it makes it forgettable. This could have been any episode that takes place at any point in the show, and it wouldn't feel any different. So we finally hit the start of the filler episodes of the season, with Miss Mariko and Toru inviting Neto, Mail, and Chisao along to a Hot Springs Club meeting which the two belong to, out in Yoka Village on the outskirts of the region. Though them inviting Chisao along, and Chisao even being in their class to be invited, once more highlights what I got into with his introduction. That the kid really does not need to be here. They have him here to hold the place of a Dekao-shaped hole in the ensemble, and he just doesn't. But yeah, Mari and Toru are true Hot Spring fanatics, leaving Mail and Neto in the background to their antics of basically offering free reviews to places, their fervor leaving the others behind, allowing them to run into... And this episode just got 10 times better! Wow, I have not had to do that to myself in a while. And yeah, she's got an eye for talent and customers. For as expected, the inn they're staying at is the Ura Inn, run by Tamako's family. Thus, instead of being able to enjoy the open-air baths, which they are actually being prevented from doing by the over-obsessive antics of Mariko and Toru, who do such inane things as making them learn the right way to drink the water of the baths until they learn which one it's supposed to be, which in and of itself is disgusting. Seriously, just let them have their coffee milk and be done with it. Well, Neto sneaks away from that nonsense to get something for his parents, which leads into the conflict with Tamako, who is bored out in the sticks and after a challenge, offering to let Neto take whatever he wants from her wares for free as long as he can beat her Navi. Neto, being a kid, does not realize he's about to be conned. Fortunately, he's the net battler behind saving the world, so it's not like he's an easy mark. Again, unfortunately though, he is facing Metal Man, who, as we've discussed before, is basically Gutsman, but if Gutsman can actually take a punch. Ironically, Neto and Rockman not being an easy mark is even better for Tamako, for as I've said, she's a bored battle freak that really just needs to let out her aggressions. But unfortunately, this plot of Neto trying to fight off being conned is interrupted by Bubble Man, who interrupts their fight. And of course does it in the most incompetent of ways that keeps being knocked aside, and instead damaging the network and thus the inn and shop, and consequently breaking up the fight. But because it was interrupted, and Neto's literally the only opponent she's had that's put up a fight, well, at this point, Tamako gets a little obsessive over finishing that fight, even to the point of interfering with Neto's attempts to get in the hot springs at last. Sidebar, what is with older women having a thing for Neto, with how the writing staff are, well, writing this series? You can see how the rest of the episode is going to go from there. Every time Rock and Metal Man would try and have their match, Bubble Man would attempt to intervene and attack Rockman with some covert esoteric means. That by proxy would set off something in the building's network that put a pause in the fight and lead to Bubble Man getting injured, and Neto never getting his chance at the hot springs. What's funny about some of these antics is it's almost as if Tamako's got some capabilities as a ninja, or might throw down with the middle fist herself if a dimensional area were to form just to catch her targets. All of which end up true, once more, due to actor illusion. As Tamako's actress, Takako Honda, on top of doing a ton of Japanese dubs of American movies and TV shows, is also known for playing Anko Mitarashi, Pokemon Hunter J from the Sinnoh arc of the anime, and Electra Jill Lowenhertz from Cross Age, on top of being the second Japanese actress to voice the Tomb Raider herself, Lara Croft. And see, this plot would be fine if this was Neto and Tamako's battle doing this, showing how cluttered a normal network can be with the system it runs with regards to people having fun in the future just facing a challenge. But as the problem with Bubble Man's episodes generally is, most .exe fans hate Bubble Man, and we don't like seeing him around even if he is purportedly the comic relief Waspinator type villain for the series. And his complete ineptitude that forms his entire villain motif just gets old fast, as it's the same damn thing over and over again. This episode basically burned the capability to use the character like this, as it's not even one grand scheme that's deeply flawed, but I'll throw a bubble bomb at him, time and again, and it's just not appealing. Like, I get what they were trying to do here. I do. Bubble Man was made a comedic gag villain in the .exe anime because the video game character version was a complete scumbag and a lot of people hated him. But what a lot of writers don't really realize is there is only so much compartmentalization an audience is capable of doing to distinguish different interpretations of the same character from one another. And you see this a lot with media that has wildly different continuities or showcases of what a character does. Batman fans being baffled by his inconsistent hatred of rock and roll, while otherwise being consistent on the we don't want to see a Batman who freely kills thing. Spider-Man fans debating which version of Peter Parker is the least irresponsible of them, despite his motto purportedly being about responsibility. Which version of Cyclops isn't an asshole? Only to realize it's true of all of them. For Japanese media fans, it's usually not that huge a divergence, as under normal circumstances, a light novel, manga, or video game being adapted into anime or live-action form has the makers follow the pre-existing media to take characterization and motifs for a character from, unless the company is creating a compilation movie. And if a compilation movie happens, all bets are off, as all anime compilation films across the board fail to respect the importance of character nuance in their grand bastardization of those stories. But here, with the .exe anime, things are consistent with the games, up to a point. And then since there's only so much time in the games to consider what these characters are, that past these, they've got to create more from something. And you can only do so much with a murderous scumbag whose means of attack involve water and soap bubbles. Making him completely inept? That makes sense, but it still doesn't make us want to see the guy more. I said he could be seen as a sort of Waspinator for the .exe anime, but the key to why Waspinator in Transformers Beast Wars worked was because the staff writers actually hated trying to deal with the character but were forced to use him. Thus, in the process of using the story to hate on the guy, they unintentionally came to love him as he became an important part of the series' comic relief with how they'd spent so much time busting him up. And the fact he did go through that much torment while not appearing to be that bad a guy got the audience endeared to him. But here, with this series, sorry, they never pulled that off. Bubbleman is Axess Onward's version of the Cutman brothers, and he never stops being annoying or diverting attention from better tales than his. But yeah, in the final face-off they have, Tamako goes all out from the start. And it completely fails as Neto and Rockman have gotten much better at distraction tactics, which leads Bubbleman to finally reveal himself in a suit of bubble armor. Yeah, I have a collection of needles he might like. But Metal Man, well not Needle Man, is still spiky enough to put Bubbleman down in compensation for earlier, only for Bubbleman to trigger a set of dimensional area converters he'd somehow secured. How? Like, I would think the Dark Lord's benefactor would want to keep a tight grip on access to those. And yeah, they're another of those summoned from cyberspace ones too. Bubbleman was just here for petty revenge. Who authorized his use of them? And yeah, it's a waste, as Neto once cross-fused literally chases Bubbleman away with one shot of the Rockbuster. Not even with a charge shot either. With that, the group's overnight stay at the Hot Springs ends, with Neto, Mail, and Chisao never having gotten their chance to enter even one. The wrap-up. We have a Hot Springs episode, as this is an anime cliché. We have Thirsty Battlemania Battlemaniac to Tamako, who just needs to sleep with something. We have Pop the Bubble! Pop the Bubble! For our wish for Bubbleman to just go away. We have animation gaffes, for this episode having a lot of off-character model animation that is just, I don't get why it's here. Yeah, it's a filler episode, but that doesn't give all the excuses for slacking on that. Not much else to say about this one. I love seeing the battle freak that is Tamako and Middleman when I can, and I'm happy to see her here, especially as Neto needs to get Metal Soul from her later. But Bubbleman getting here and being the focus antagonist of the episode, as opposed to just the interrupted rivalry with Tamako being the episode itself, sours it a lot for me, for reasons I've already discussed. The next time Tamako shows up won't be for a while, as the production staff try to pace out Neto and Rockman gaining the soul forms to be over the series' entire length, as smart showrunners that have to deal with massive form change numbers are supposed to do. Seriously, Rockman.exe Axess, released in 2003, handles the acquisition and rotational use of their form change system better than any cover series has for any writer that has more than 6 forms since, I want to say Wizard. And when Tamako next appears, it will be for a much better outing, where she more than has a chance to settle the score with this new rivalry that will hold her attention for some time. Well, there's a line I never expected anyone to say a second time. And no, I'm not telling you where I heard it before. Den City is taken over by a net-boiling craze, complete with bad English, and Neto and Mail are in for the physical pastime. And unlike most sports I rather dislike, I actually really enjoy bowling. Seriously, it was how I gained half my PE credits in college. Primarily because it was one of the few gym classes available that didn't require a mile-long hike, yes, seriously, up a hill to my college's gym complex that would take half an hour of people's day just to get there if they didn't have a car, which I did not at the time. Plus, why I actually do enjoy it is a purely skill-driven game, not requiring a minimum physical aptitude to be able to not be bad at it, beyond one being able to lift the bowling balls. You just need to figure out how to best position your body and movements to send the ball out to strike out the pins, and how you best adapt to each bowling lane's defects to achieve those strikes. And y'all know me, I am a complete sucker for striker packs. This plot brings us the return of Higure, who happens to win tickets for bowling time, Since the Allies are so busy with the current craze, they've had to start employing a scheduling system to accommodate all the players. Thing is, Higure is so outside of current fads, he doesn't realize until the prize winner literally spells it out to him that he can use this to get a private date with Mariko, and completely screws up telling her the context that it is a date when he invites her out because he's just that nervous. Thus, Neto and Mail get invited along as well. Well, it's that or Mariko is using the kids as a defense screen against her having to tell him in defined terms that she's just not that into him. Though, as a third option, you could also have Mariko potentially shipping Neto and Mail and taking advantage of this to turn it into a double date. I'm not discounting that option. And yeah, net bowling isn't just a because it's the future thing. The Navis are in on it too, with the introduction of Bowlman on the servers of the bowling alley. He's actually a mostly benign Navi, at least until Shademan, his benefactor, and a Dark Chip get involved, as Bowlman just wants to perfect his perfect game, but Shademan sending him the Dark Chip causes him to be corrupted and run rampant.
ちょうどうずうずしていたところだ。こっちの世界に俺の相手はもういない。
Oh man, we're in for a bizarre adventure now! I don't think it's ever said in the episode whether Bowlman was a Dark Lloyd from the start, a natural AI Navi created from remnant data like the other Navis, or the bowling alley's mascot Navi they just hijacked for this thanks to the Dark Chip. I kind of lead into the last interpretation, considering both his design being rather specific for this, and the fact that, well, it leaves open an interpretation I like, in that the Dark Lloyd faction isn't made up of just naturally created AIs, but Navis that have left their operators due to the corruption of Dark Chips making them addicted to them, and thus willing to do whatever they can to get their fix and thus join the Dark Lloyd's faction. It also helps make such minions more disposable than others, as the upper echelon Dark Lloyds are just using these converts until they run them dry, which further showcases the nefarious, malicious nature of this threat, with that likewise complementing well some things we will be seeing later. Though I do take back a bit of that not just because it's the future thing of net bowling. The thing about this is the players wear special gloves that project a soft light hologram of the bowling ball, which the pins interact with. This allows even players with minimum physical capability to be more in on the game, and makes it safer in the alleys thanks to not having those things thrown around where they could accidentally hurt others if the player doesn't know what they're doing, or they throw the ball badly. Yeah, I don't know if any of my audience has ever been in a bowling alley when an accident like that happens. I have, and it is not pretty. But as Higure is, well, a nerd, and not a jock, he panics when he's up to bat. Numberman thinking that he could tweak the bowling program so Higure could play on easy mode, and resultantly a Navi who's all about diligence to perfect their game, who is under the influence of a Dark Chip. Yeah, they are not happy to see that, and that results in them going on the attack. His programming twisted to believe that Higure's lack of sportsmanship must be true of all humans, and they must be punished for that. Thus, every time Higure lands a strike, Bowlman connects it to a real-life target he begins attacking through the net, while at the same time screwing with their game in the way Numberman had intended. So Higure gets all the points, and no one else can hit any, in the most obvious and obnoxious, to the players I mean, of ways. Numberman though eventually alerts everyone to the Dark Lloyd, and also Higure's cheating, so they can come and rescue him from being used as a giant pin for the corrupted Bowlman's amusement. After that, it's a matter of dealing with Bowlman's pin missiles, which is handled with use of the series' first use of the battleship version of Roll Soul, as it's the only one Neto has at the moment with its healing abilities. But that just gets the Dark Lloyd's benefactor to approve use of a dimensional area, leading to things shifting to the cross-fusion front, and to something else the series could have handled better. See, I know the point of why they didn't was because they wanted to treat cross-fusion Rockman as its own separate thing, distaffed from the standard form system, as it's technically Neto's transformation, and that's why the design for the form is different, and the form represents Rockman's bond with his operator and not anyone else. But would it not have been cool if they used the soul forms alongside the synchro chips all season? Food for thought. Yeah, probably would have been better had the Benefactor created a larger dimensional area than this so Bullman could utilize his attacks better. And because he doesn't have the range he needs, well, Neto's close enough to him to turn his attacks back on him.
いや、まだだ。ボーリングボマー。
Fortunately, Step Sword saves the day on this, it being one of the chips that really does prove its worth in the anime. Bullman's overcommitment to this attack leaving him wide open, and allowing Neto to score his first deletion of a member, forced or no, of the Dark Void forces. Meaning overall, this day's been a win. At least for those who played fair. Though even Higure is not at a total loss, as Mariko has decided to give Higure a second chance at a date, with Mail and Neto dragged along with them again. The wrap-up. We have sports cliché, because of course. We have cheaters never plan things out, to Higure and Neverman attempting to cheat at a game even nerds with no muscle mass enjoy, and at a game where the tools are now literally weightless as their soft light holograms. How do you screw this up, dude? This episode's alright, with the overall story improved by the possibility that Bullman wasn't a nefarious villain until Shademan gave him the Dark Chip, which plays into later parts of the arc about Dark Chip corruption. It's a casual, fun watch with not much to gripe about, as filler episodes between more important arc episodes should be. At one of Japan's airports, Hinoken returns from Jawai, for some reason not initially explained. As elsewhere in the net, digital vines clog up all sorts of operation relating to transit in the net, something Hinoken was hoping wouldn't hit yet. He's apparently encountered the force behind it, and unfortunately Neto's too busy trying to avoid his homework. Incidentally, this is a return to the series for Naoko Marukawa, one of the group of writers who insist on running Neto as if he were a complete, irresponsible, incompetent, brain-dead idiot. So of course this is how they'd go about showing how he should be on top of a crisis like this, but for some reason is slacking on things without purpose or reason when the last several episodes have shown him to be better than that. It's like they avoided doing this that overtly in the previous episodes they wrote, mostly writing off Neto's dumb moments as being things that, when you're put in an unfamiliar situation, you stumble over yourself accidentally as you don't have an experienced plan of attack on a matter. But here, it's a lot more indefensible, and gives you a sense of how this all goes over. And yeah, it's actually Haruka that alerts him to something being off, instead of it being Meijin, who, as we've already established, is supposed to contact Neto whenever something like this happens in the event it's Dark Void related, so Neto can investigate. As I've said, this series requires Neto to not be an idiot, to not be irresponsible, and it's only a small sect of writers that keep insisting he is against everything else we see of the guy and what the better writers on the show do. And in this case, the failure to inform him of a crisis, and the failure of him to do anything on his own when he hears by happenstance that strange things are going on, is what directly exasperates what happens in this episode, for no reason other than the writer of the episode is bashing on the character and making him these ways that are in contradiction to how he normally is supposed to act. And it's not just him, it's basically everybody in this episode that is acting like an idiot. As the individual doing the sabotage in the episode, which is removing critical data from all over the network that freezes up all sorts of programs, is Plant Man. And Plant Man's tampering is distinctly visual, with plant vines appearing on all screens directly connected to anything that is affected. And no one thought to go online and see if, hey, a Navi or virus could be causing this? As normally, Outside of some piece of machinery failing or alternatively going rampant, normally there is not this type of visual cue to show tampering to immediately tip off any investigator to what is wrong. With such an overt sign of sabotage, it's actually surprising Meijin and the others in the net police were not on the trail of the saboteur sooner. Now, once more to elaborate on my recurring complaint, it is not just that Neto's written as an irresponsible idiot by certain members of the staff that is my problem. It is how they bend over backwards to create that interpretation in conflict with everything we've seen before. And by proxy, dumb down the entire world when they do it to emphasize that Neto in specific is the problem. But by doing so, showcase it often isn't him, and is only made out to be so by how the focus is targeted on him for the ridicule as he's made to act out of character, and yet everyone somehow expects him to solve the crisis of the week despite that. That is not a good thing any way around. Eventually, Neto and Rockman track down the root of the problem, finding Plantman has set himself up in the transportation server, and unfortunately a host of security navies prevent them simply burning the cyber foliage away, leaving them to have to take the slow way of chopping at it. Unfortunately, the lost data hasn't been returned, another one of these data plants having set up at the library where Mail has similarly lost Roll, with the plant there growing to bloom with Roll as a host. However, we see another sign of why Naoko Marikawa has not gotten with the program with the evolved status quo. The advanced model PET, thanks to it using wireless technology, is not ever supposed to lose contact and connectivity with the Navi that normally hosts it, so the operator should be able to send chip data and recall the Navi from literally anywhere. But as Neto physically takes time to get to the Akihara library where Mail is, the story treats Rockman as being unable to contact Neto at all, as was the status quo when they had the previous model of PET that required the operator physically jack their terminals into a wired outlet to connect to a Navi. Thus, Rockman gets ambushed by viruses while trying to deal with the plant solo. It's like, did Marikawa miss a meeting? Were they not there when the staff writers went over this stuff? Were they not aware of how things were set up and changed for the season from the previous scripts? Because there is no story reason for why this is happening this way, other than Marikawa insisting that Neto is an imbecile. This attack of idiocy, however, leaves Rockman weak as Plantman finally comes in, voiced by Hiroyuki Yoshino? Okay, what is the guy who is partly responsible for screwing up Gundam Seed Destiny, made the character Kallen Kozuki be treated like shit in Code Geass alongside the scripts with the compilation movies, and completely and utterly botched a certain Magical Index Season 3 story adaptation, doing here voicing a Dark Light antagonist before any of that happened? Actually, no. There is also a voice actor that is also named Hiroyuki Yoshino. The Hiroyuki Yoshino who is a voice actor is also, ironically, most known for playing the character of Alleluia Haptism in Gundam 00. But unlike with that character, Plantman does not have a superpowered psycho side that would allow him to avoid the attacks of Heatman, as this is what Hinokens come back to town to track down. Unfortunately, Plantman's smarter than a number of other Darkloids, and loaded himself with water element data to fight against those who are his type weakness, freezing Heatman solid with Dark Chip augmented ice that damages the Super Burner Navi enough that the plant attacks that normally wouldn't work actually do. However, something odd happens as Heatman gets more and more amped up in the battle. Mannerisms of the prior Fireman linking into the normally more stoic Heatman. At least, I think. The problem with Heatman and Hinoken with the back half of Season 1 is the guy was barely around since. While he held a grudge against Gospel for their role in Fireman's loss, he wasn't around much to really engage in that. And when the former World 3 agents were involved, it was more common that others outside of their number would take focus, such as with Midoi and Alex stories with Gauss. And that's in turn because Freezeman showed up as the focused antagonist all of twice. Thus, Heatman in the time he's been around hasn't had an opportunity to actually have character. So how are we supposed to know that this isn't how Heatman is supposed to be acting? This is another reason why the episode struggles. It hinges this on something we're not even aware is happening in regards to the shifts between Heat and Fireman, as Heatman wasn't allowed to be a character with a distinct persona themselves. And again, Morikawa had to have known that. They wrote previous episodes part of Hinoken and Fireman's character arc to be aware of that detail. But regardless, this emergence of Heatman's past self happens as the Navi is left critically injured. It only being through use of tainted virus chips that Hinoken is able to plant a tracker on the Dark Void for later. But yeah, Heatman's prognosis isn't good. The episode now choosing to flash back to what got the pair to head over here in the first place. It appears that while the World 3 agents were still operating their curry shop in Jawai, they collectively came under attack by the Darkloids and Plantman in specific. Why? You want to give us a reason to why? Like, I get them attacking around Densan City to help distract the Net Police from getting a handle on their longer schemes by keeping them occupied, while also disrupting the simple lives of humans for their eventual take over everything goals. But the World 3 team are literally in another country, one which isn't exactly a big player in global security or tech development that would act as a counter to them, or possess resources they could use that would legitimize going to strike there as happens in later episodes. All you have there is an annoying digital idol, the remnants of Yuichiro's original dimensional area experiments, and the World 3 crew that have retired from being villains. Military target, a resort island community, is not. Regardless, Hinoken's been chasing Plantman, as the other Navis are still trapped there, as Heatman wasn't strong enough to burn the entire entrapment plant down, as it had grown too strong off the other's data. Thinking the best way to stop it was to delete the root, of the problem. At worst, Roll is now stuck in the same situation of slowly being drained of life by them as well. And here's where the story once again shoots itself in the foot. As, remember the first plant Rockman cut down with his sword chip earlier? Yeah, they rescued two Navis pretty damn easily from it. And they're stuck there stationarily rooted to the cyberground. Is there any reason why they, couldn't have cut them down in the interim? As I know Hinoken has sword chips. They are fire sword chips, but a sword is a sword. Fortunately though, Meijin's here to help as well. Since Meijin is Heatman's creator, and Heatman is in pretty poor condition at this point, wasn't he deleted last season too, taking down Freezeman? How'd he come back from that? Anyways, Meijin can do everything they need to repair the Navi back up to full strength, and augment him further to be able to counter Darkloids too. However, due to the time limit they're under before the other victims of Plantman succumb to the damage over time, Meijin has to do something rather drastic, using an emergency recovery program he's spent years developing to restore Hinoken's Navi back to factory settings as Fireman. As Meijin explains, the original Fireman had too little data left to exist on his own, but when Meijin merged Fireman's data with Heatman, everything that Fireman had left was compressed into Heatman as saved within him. As Heatman was just an operated shell before that point, the recovery program will in turn invert that relationship, restoring Fireman by replacing his lost data from that which is then cannibalized from Heatman's damaged data. Two broken Navis acting symbiotically to be restored as one.
お前はHinoken-sama.
Eventually, Neto uses Hinoken's bug to track Plantman to, where else, a botanical garden for their confrontation. Unfortunately, they're expected, and man does Plantman seem to like the sound of his own voice. Which is all the worse for him, as with how he's depicted here, well, all I hear in my head when he opens his mouth is the voice of Levi Stubbs from his role in the film Little Shop of Horrors.
Does it have to be human? Does it have to be mine?
Unfortunately, even dual-wielding doesn't give Rockman much of an advantage due to Plantman being powered up by a dark chip. Fire attacks likewise no longer effective due to dark chips giving Darkloids another ability we've seen in the series, but from other Navis. That being the Dark Aura, the inverse counterpart to Life Aura, which was last seen in Battle Network 3, when it was used by an official Navi trying and failing to get one up on Base.exe. See, I told you it counted as a dark chip! Even though Base's Life Aura abilities would later be assimilated to be part of the Dark Aura branded chips. Whoops. So it's just up to the protagonist pair to fend off Plantman's augmented assaults until Meijin can finish his work.
Fireman!
ロックマン、後で必ず駆けつけると言っただろ。
私の鼻が燃えてしまう。
Yeah, we can see that. Do you ever shut up? Plantman slots the dark chip, seeming to gain back the initiative. However, due to the pair Navi's long history as rivals, it's just the type of bond that makes for a synchronization of soul. And with twice the firepower at play, Plantman's vines wilt in the presence of the eternal flame of hope. Plantman appears to be deleted, and his data plants all vanish, restoring the affected Navis in the net, with Neto printing the new soul form chip, and Hinoken welcoming his true partner home. The wrap-up. We have Burning Soul, a clear Yu-Gi-Oh! Reference and an appropriate one to Hinoken having to master his inner self a bit, and to the revival of Fireman himself. We have I've Got Soul, to Rockman gaining access to Fire Soul, this being the second of the Red Sun exclusive forms Axess in the series. Unsurprisingly, the next form they get is also a Red Sun form, because overall, Red Sun forms were just better. We have Please Stop Talking, to Plantman, who just cannot shut up, and has to say everything he's experiencing and planning as it happens. We have Flanderized Moron, to the recurring and annoying habit of half the Rockman.exe anime staff for depicting Neto as an irresponsible idiot for no justifiable in-story reason. As I have said time and again over the years, being bad at schoolwork isn't necessarily a sign someone is stupid, and there's no reason for them to go out of their way to repeatedly enforce that trope when the truly imbecilic are those who don't think and ignore reality in ways that end up being malicious to those around them. And as a consequence, this episode is frustrating, in that the Hinoken elements of it are a strong backbone to ground it, but that's not what it does. It fills time with the insufferable Neto is a moron subplot that, to beat a dead horse because damn it this is my show, isn't truly reflective of the nuance of the character. This wouldn't be so bad in moderation or in the way other staff writers do it, where it is more a sign of the age he's in as opposed to detrimental to his own development. Had Neto been more on point and focused on his job, or the flashback part of this with Hinoken finding his fellow team's Navis in this state and coming to Neto for help so they could investigate and defeat the Dark Lord together, well, those would have been far stronger beats that would have carried the entire thing without the need for unnecessary fluff that harms the involved. I also dislike Roll being used as a victim for this again, since it really could have been any of the rotating cast of Navis that got captured, whereas they'd mostly stepped away from a Roll is useless interpretation thus far this season. But unfortunately for all involved, this does end up being an arc episode, due to it being an episode that includes a soul form acquisition and debut. But it's not a net positive one due to the Season 1 flotsam that just didn't seem to get cleared out. A new science museum is setting up shop in Akihara called Historyland, and the Net Police have been tipped off that this just might be something the Dark Lords might either be behind or intent on wrecking, as there have been reports of a virus data chip festering in their network. Thus, Meijin gets Neto and his friends a pass into the facility before it officially opens, so they can check it out undercover. This, incidentally, is our first episode of the season with Mayuri Sekijima writing it, and once more like the last episode it shows due to, again, them being the primary one behind starting the Neto is an idiot protagonist characterization, especially with how Neto and Rockman have to reaffirm their friendship at the start of the episode, which once more tries to sell Neto as a lazy, irresponsible jerk. Some can see them trying to list off the answers at the same time being a type of synchro training so they can make sure they stay on the same wavelength as one another, aka what they messed up in the 3rd episode of the season, but just spouting off random trivia is not a good indicator of that. Like, here's an example from my side of things. I've lived with my roommates for 4 years now, and I've known them for even longer, and we know each other pretty well, to the point that in casual conversation between the 3 of us, in response to one of the others, 2 of us will say the same thing at the same time, or otherwise preempt the other in saying what we would have. That is being on the same wavelength as another person. This? It's pop quiz hotshot. You know what the answer is supposed to be ahead of time, so why is saying it at the same time proof of a bond, or that you're in alignment with someone with that deep a bond? It's not! This reads even more poorly to me also because of the games, where Lan and Mega Man are so in tune with each other because of their bond as brothers that they can communicate with each other even without words. Or the manga where Lan's consciousness literally rides around with Mega Man in the deepest parts of the cyberworld, both because of full synchro. That how this show depicts things here in this episode, it's all surface level. Not implying the intimacy of connection the two need to be able to use a synchro chip. And as always with Sekijima, it's all to fuel derisive jokes at Neto's expense, as they all walk into a trap because we are once again insisting that Neto has to keep his identity as a net saver from his friends out of nowhere, despite that being Neto's decision, and solely Neto's decision to keep it from them, and before this, not presented as an order from his superiors as it is now. And guess what? Sekijima contradicts this later in saying that it was Neto's decision, and only Neto's decision, and not a command from the net savers when he needs to use his credentials publicly where he doesn't keep it a secret. Hell, we saw last episode Neto using his net saver badge in public to get access to the terminals Plantman was infesting because it's a public service job. And moreover, Mail already knows. Moreover, the entire point of Neto keeping it secret from them all was he wanted to keep them out of danger in the event a Dark Lord would attack them if a dimensional area manifested. Yeah, keeping them informed helps them evacuate faster and not try to help. But then we have what he's doing here, and he is deliberately leading them into danger with full awareness this could be a trap meant to go after him and those he cares for, which makes keeping them deliberately unaware of what is happening mind-breakingly dangerous. I once more must reiterate, do you see why I have a problem with half the writing staff and this writer in specific insisting on writing this character as an idiot? Because it is legitimately their excuse for doing stupid things in their stories and then just writing it off as the fault of a character who should and does know better. It is once more the definition of an idiot plot for a character who knows better than to do a thing to then deliberately do the thing anyways. Ugh. Well, anyways, as the other kids look around, Rockman logs in to look for the virus infestation. All while the kids see the science museum is in fact mostly built off of junk science. I get the feeling that on top of being a poor writer, Mayuri Sekijima also failed some of their other educational courses. Then again, I'm the guy who keeps having to point out when these shows mix up their uses of the words meteoroid and asteroid, and when something fantastical might actually be somewhat plausible with real-world science. And this is the show that once thought a falling satellite the size of my car could possibly decimate half a city. You know, I should really rewatch something that actually did get real science right, and the biggest argument part of its discourse is people not knowing how to spell the protagonist's name correctly, despite the way to spell it literally being part of the title. Eventually, the kids come across a mirror maze, which is actually the plan. Since the mirror maze uses hologram data projectors, they use them to mirror the communication connection between Rockman and Neto, and dupe it to differing sources that cut the two off. Again, not quite how that works, but quantum. I really don't think Mayuri Sekijima knows how technology works. But yeah, the Mirror Maze server is where Rockman finds Beastman lying in wait for him. and the mirrors entirely throw off Rockman's ability to counter him without his appearances reflected all over the place. Gotta admit, this might seem smart, at least in a way you don't expect from a beast. Especially with how the data duplicates of Neto then begin sending Rockman conflicting operation instructions, so Rockman plans to do one thing, only to be sent the wrong tools. The one thing about this that is kind of funny about this, at least in a sad and pathetic way, is, well, since Beastman is a Navi based on bestial animals, has anyone in my audience ever had a pet? Has anyone in my audience ever had a pet that thought a mirror was magic? And when they look at it, they get excited and think there's another animal trapped within it? Or say, watched a movie with a pet in it, with your pet, where the pet then thought that animal on screen was real? 'Cause, yeah, I have. My first dog, a lovable doofus of a golden retriever named O'Brien, for years whenever he went in front of a floor-length mirror, would see his own reflection and start barking at himself, and pawing at the mirror until he realized it was his reflection. Thus, a Navi that's a literal beast when they're normally mystified by mirrors, using mirrors to baffle an intelligent Navi, that's an interesting twist on dynamics, with it being up to Rockman and Neto's bond to see them through and resynchronize despite the complication. Though again, you know Sekijima's writing this as if it's season 1 still as Neto and Rockman don't own or use fire or aqua tower chips, yet that's the first thing Neto here tries to use. And again, as was the Chekhov's gun at the beginning of the episode to make this plainly obvious what they were going to do, they do their stupid synchronization exercise to reconnect, and enable them to properly fight Beastman off. And with use of one of my favorite battle chips, the Boomerang, Beastman sent a dark chip to supercharge himself, and the benefactor triggering a dimensional area so Beastman can wreck the place, with plenty of room to cause havoc. Before Neto can cross-fuse, however, Rockman's cornered in cyberspace by viruses, when he could just jack out, while Neto faces the same in real life. Not as ludicrous as Seto Kaiba getting a thug to flinch by flinging a card at him, but still effective. Yeah, I have no idea why Enzon's here. He doesn't become relevant to the plot again for another few episodes. But they know about Neto's capability to cross-fuse, and they cover him so they can go after Beastman and push him back out of reality. And yet, even with all that, that's still not enough to delete the beast. Still, at the end, we do get a sign of how far these two have come, with Neto and Enzon both complimenting the other for their own respective growth, as it's revealed that Enzon has also been deputized as a net saver. And while Neto is the public face of the investigation and counterattacks, Enzon has instead been asked to look into the means by which dark chips are being distributed, and who is in fact behind it all. This essentially mirroring the Dark Lord's benefactor using them to sow chaos to distract from his own plans. The investigation crossed paths with Neto's assignments, that's why he was here, and warning Neto that he needs to not be overdependent on just his bond, but his other capabilities need to continue to be improved as well. And unfortunately, this is not delivered well by Sekijima in writing this, as it comes off as, once more, deriding Neto in how it's presented, instead of this starting on addressing Enzon's own arc for the season, tied from his prior appearances, and how Enzon's bond with Blues more bases itself around strength and power as master and servant, instead of a more intimate connection that, by presented evidence in this episode, almost failed today because their means of expressing the connection was shown to be so shallow. But again, it's only shown to be so shallow because Sekijima made it that way. Thus, this exchange, which Enzon is eventually proven wrong on when writers other than Sekijima address this, delivers the exact opposite message it is supposed to. It's literally been 3 months, if that. And of course, as this is a Sekijima script, we end this on Rockman making fun of Neto for a character trait that is only present when the writers who treat him badly are around. The wrap-up. We have Mirror Match, for Beastman using funhouse mirrors to get an edge on someone he sees as beneath him. We have Designated Dumbass, for Mayuri Sekijima running Neto as a moron and bashing him for it. I will not stop calling this out, people. Though despite that, this episode is on the lower end of okay, with it being another sign of the general improvement in writing the show featured during Axess that outside of treating Neto like a dunce, the villain plan was better and made sense, for the most part, and even Enzan's 11th hour save made sense in context. But again, I feel the majority of the script is out of step with where the show is going and the standards of the new status quo that demand more from the cast than what Sekijima is willing to show them being able to give. At the very least, they write fewer episodes starting with this season, but their faction on the Right Neto's an Idiot front will continue to screw with truly trying to develop the cast, and him in particular, for some time. In Juwai's cyberworld, we see Gutsmen fighting the World 3 Navis, and actually appearing to do decently against them, evading their attacks and even countering some of them. I'll say, you didn't even need to cast anti-fire to do that. And thus, Gutsman and Dekao just soloed all the World 3 Navis? What? No, seriously, that was my response when I watched this as a kid. Just, what? Gutsman is consistently an easy boss, so for Dekao to clear all the Battle Network 1 main antagonists on his own, the kid's leveled up. And it turns out he did it by, since he moved to Juwai's, is apparently where his other parent works, working part-time at Maha Niban and training under the World 3 agents, all to get back at Neto. Because some rivalries never die. Does he think he's Arnold Schwarzenegger circa the early 2000s now? Cause you kinda need to work out a lot for that. Also, how did he hide behind that standee? He is wider in both relevant dimensions than that. But yeah, training under the World 3 agents has kind of turned Dekao into a jerk. It's been 2 months, if that. I admit, while the first season conclusively took place over the course of a year, and the game series decisively takes place over the course of 2 years fully, Battle.Works 1 through 3 being 1 year, and 4 through 6 being the other, but beginning with Axess, the show kind of starts to move over a sliding time scale, in that Neto, Mail, and Dekao are all supposed to be 6th graders right now, but them being in 6th grade lasts until the end of Beast Plus. That is at least 3 years of an anime series that purportedly takes place in 1 year, meaning he can't have left more than a month ago. Granted, that is all the future show's problem. Right now, Dekao is showing himself as a massive jerk that isn't endearing Mail to being affectionate to him. Thus, it's down to trying to thrash Neto in a net battle, using to his advantage everything World 3 has taught him. And jump cut to... Yeah, no, back in July, the World 3 group are grateful that Dekao has finally left. Dekao barged in there begging for training, and then was not a help in running the place at all, but instead a nuisance to doing their work with how he would screw it all up. Thus, that earlier training session where he thrashed them, yeah, that was all a mock battle where they faked defeat. Impressive considering Dekao pulled off a same chip type program advance on them, which usually means they hit for massive damage. And those time bombs are actually dead useful depending on whether the chip type fits in your folder. But yeah, it's grudge match time. With them taking it to the arcade, right up until Neto gets a net saver call as a Dark Lloyd's been spotted at the Akihara gym, with someone screwing with its ventilation and gas systems, turning the place into a super sauna. Which is, of course, the domain of Rockman.exe, the second actual Battle Network 4 Navi we get in this season, with him ready to snipe the stratosphere with his flames or burn everything to the ground with rapid fire. And for those who don't get the in-joke, in Japanese, Burnerman is voiced by Shinichiro Miki, who played Locke on Stratos in Gundam 00, whereas in English he's voiced by Richard Ian Cox, who voiced Alleluia Haptism in Gundam 00. I did not expect both actors for Alleluia to have worked on this show. Then again, there was a time when Richard Ian Cox was all over a lot of series that were produced and dubbed in Canada, both in live-action and animation ADR work. He really was that ubiquitous to the airwaves in the 2000s between Kai Shiden and Toho Koeng in Gundam 0079 and Seed, respectively, on top of being Alleluia, Quicksilver in X-Men Evolution, Big Cloud in Zoid's New Century Zero, once again amusing because of the Studio Zebek connection, and the Rumiko Takahashi characters Inuyasha and Ranma Saotome, with him even reprising his role as Inuyasha for the recent Yashahime series. And if I wasn't seeing him in the anime I was watching those years, then he was in the sci-fi I was watching as well. The dude's still around and active on social media too, but he has less time to actually dedicate to voice acting, as he actually became a high school acting department teacher situated in Vancouver and British Columbia where, coincidentally, several of his voice acting compatriots and co-workers for these shows graduated from. I'd say life's funny like that, but looking up the details on Canada's actor stable and where the good actors have been trained, well, it's a smaller range than you might think, and more recent talent from up north might actually have been trained by him at some point. What? I find details like this fascinating, and that's not even getting into all the cool stuff Shinichiro Miki is known for, with Burner Man being another step up the climb of his career. Case in point, he also voiced Charizard. Anyways, yeah, Burner Man. Yeah, I am in my 30s, and I still squee at how cool this character is portrayed in both iterations of the show. As again, they stopped the revisionist dub stuff with this season, and the way both actors play into the arrogant mannerisms of the character in divergent ways is just so good. Shinichiro Miki giving the presentation of that line as if they were stating an absolute fact that it would be foolish to deny, while Richard Ian Cox's version gave the impression that Burner Man has a massive chip on his shoulder. And both iterations are absolutely true to the character. And yeah, Burner Man's not giving them the time for them to get a beat on him. Escaping in a toy fighter plane? Okay, me reviewing the show keeps doing that, where it unintentionally alludes to or references something made after it, or an actor involved in it would later star in. What is with that? But yeah, Dekao gets sucked into this, and interferes with Rockman's attempts to face Burner Man. And this would be much simpler if he knew what was going on. And sure enough, Mail lets him in on the NetSaver thing since she does know about the whole mess, once more informing that Neto's insistence on keeping it secret is rather dumb, as is the other writer's insistence on casting Neto as a moron when he's being shown to be pretty damn diligent, responsible, and smart when Kenichi Araki is actually writing him, as is happening with this episode. Dekao actually coming to realize, with this talk, how huge a jerk he's been, and what he's now enabled to happen thanks to Burner Man getting away. After all, his friends almost died several times in the previous World 3 and Gospel incidents. So for him to enable a rogue Navi to potentially cause that to someone else? Well, suddenly, it looks like I'm the asshole, is what he's likely telling himself. That is, if he wasn't so obsessed with getting his match. But at least he's going to hold back until the chase for Burner Man is over with. Unfortunately, however, well, Burner Man has revived an old strategy of Fireman's. Namely, set everything on fire. And he does this by going to the region's natural gas main and setting the entire pipe network on fire. Which, yeah, is actually possible, but only up to a point. Natural gas is actually rather localized in its distribution. Energy companies drill deep into the Earth's surface at various points to find a vein, which usually is similar to hunting for oil. And when they find one, they cap it, build a facility capable of storing that gas emission, and then uncap that pipe so that gas fills a storage tank. That is then connected to a gas pipe network, which is in turn pumped right to your home. If the storage facility has a fire start at it, then it is plausible that the fire could then travel down the pipe network, but it's rather unlikely, as if a fire starts at the source, then the pressure is likely to leave the pipes that send the gas down them. and explosions and flames like to follow a path of least resistance with regards to their combustion. It's actually why it's possible to survive being in an explosion if you're below where the explosion occurs. Plus, these days, a lot of Japanese homes have gone fully electric, but that might not have been true 20 years ago. Where this gets silly is just how every pipe erupts as if there was a gas leak that someone struck a match in front of. That's clearly more ridiculous, as you need an ignition source to be able to trigger that, which, short of Burner Man flooding an area with gas and then triggering an electrical fire, which again, it is possible, it ain't gonna happen like that. However, by the time Neto reaches it, Burner Man's already long gone, having set a trap at a secondary storage facility, which Dekao, trying to make up for earlier, trips, him being surrounded by flames.
トリプルスロットインギガカウントボーン
But the advantage of training against a pyromaniac is you get used to being in flames. However, it's here where Dekao is finally tipped off to how easy World 3 actually went on him, as he can't even touch Burner Man, who is too agile and just sadistically toys with him before deciding to just put him out of his misery. At least until Rockman comes in for the save. However, Burner Man shows his arrogant sadism by springing the true trap he set for them, as the secondary gas facility has had its connective pipes weakened, and Burner Man ignites them, causing the tanks to start spinning, leaving Dekao and Neto to lose their footing, and with such, all of Neto's Aqua Elemental battle chips being knocked out of his pack. See, Burner Man's pretty cool when you're not facing him. Cool design, cool attitude, cool attacks, and you'll certainly be feeling cool after he leaves you with 5th degree burns after referring to him as cool so much. Yes, 4th and 5th degree burns are a thing. The victims to them are commonly dead after they receive them, but they are a thing. Surprisingly, the facility hasn't exploded after this burn started. It's just slowly making its way across the landscape as the jet burn isn't enough to lift its weight. Yeah, I actually looked this up, and after hitting a dozen subscriber paywalls to news archive sites, yeah, it is getting that bad on that matter. I found that, yes, older natural gas storage facilities were built with enough insulation that a fire could potentially do this and set a tank flying off like a rocket, and the designs of those facilities was the conceptual basis for some rocket engine designs you see for spaceships, both conceptually and in real life, and also commonly in fiction. But that is also why more modern storage tanks for volatile chemicals and flammable gases are now cylinders that don't look as strongly constructed. See, the modern ones are deliberately built with structural weak points along their roofs, so if a tank would ignite, then the explosion would then blow off the roof and release its force upwards, instead of going down and tearing the tank itself off the ground, as that could lead to even more damages and loss of life by the entirety of the tank becoming a threat as opposed to just the roof of a tank being blown off. That actually happened at a California fuel facility in October of 2019, where a tank of ethanol actually got crossed with another volatile chemical it reacted with and set off an explosion, which was right next to a tank full of jet fuel. The only reason the facility wasn't flattened by a chain reaction occurring was the tank blowing its lid off allowed the fire to burn itself out without it spreading at all, as all of its force was directed upwards instead of to the sides or down. And yeah, the two are trapped up here until it burns itself out, but Dekao and Gutsman nonetheless back them up, as they're not going to allow anyone else to beat their oldest rival, once more permitting a unison of souls. And with Gutsman's strength added to Rockman's agility, well, Burner Man's been one punched out of battle with a rocket punch, letting the burn of the tanks reach its end. The group get down for the tanks, Dekao realizing that if he truly wants to fight Neto as his equal, he still has a long way to go, and will wait for his chance after Neto finishes his task of defeating the Dark Void threat. Though unfortunately, Dekao's going to have to wait a long time until that actually occurs. The wrap-up. As this is a battle-heavy episode, I'm loving the variety of chips this one showed, and again all to the series' strength, with a lot of dynamic types of action that once more presents the strengths of this arc. We have You Changed, Man, You Used to Be Cool, to Dekao taking a walk on the dark side, because they had cookies. We have Anime Time Skip Training Arc to Dekao and Gutsman. Man, those 2 weeks training really made a difference. We have Hothead for Burner Man and his forehead that he can literally set on fire. And we have Way to Break It, Hero, to Dekao once more unintentionally endangering everyone with his obsession to beat Neto. Priorities, dude. With my mounting frustration in the last couple episodes at members of the writing staff digging in their heels and not getting with the program in regards to the story's progression, having Araki come back to write about where the hell Dekao's been, and will be going back to and from for the foreseeable future, and how that's affected him was quite, well, effective. Especially with him coming in blind to the new status quo. Well, that the guy can finally use program advances himself is also quite an improvement, even if his Giga Time Bomb ends up not being useful in the end. Which again is baffling, as I've killed bosses with those things in the past. And with such a serious sadistic threat as Burnerman's introduction in this episode, even if this weren't a progress check episode due to Guts Soul being obtained here, I'd still recommend this one hard with how perfectly balanced the action, character pieces, and drama are. And it is one that will be followed up on soon enough. Off in an unknown server, a Net Police Navi tries to meet undercover with a black market dealer specializing in dark chips. That Navi being Needleman. Later, we cut to Neto watching some other kids net battle, troubled over his latest assignment. That the dark chip mess is no longer contained to just the Darkloids, but normal Navis and their operators are now getting their hands on them. With that prior police Navi not being the first one crushed trying to find the seller. Though it would probably help them if they didn't look like Signal Man from the Sentai series Car Ranger and its American adaptation Power Rangers Turbo. Or hell, any overtly police-themed mecha series like Pat Labor or Jay Decker. So yeah, because the Net Police can't, it's up to a 12-year-old boy to do it instead. But this has made Neto realize they don't actually know what a dark chip is. Not in the sense that they don't know what it does, they have seen what it does to Navis. But more in that they don't know anything about why they're being made or distributed and why they make the Navis that install them malevolent by default. And that's a smart way to write this. As the saying goes, the first step to wisdom is admitting what you don't know in order to understand what you need to learn. Thus, they've been staking out places where people net battle in the off chance someone came by and said, "Hey, kid, do you want Navi performance enhancers?" Cause let's face it, these kinds of storylines end up doing and showing that as allegory for drug dealers, only with the additional world domination spin on it. And I like their follow-up here too, and the line of thought that the most likely suspects are those who have had sudden out-of-nowhere winning streaks, as not everyone's built up the skill and ability of their Navis, and one using a dark chip would be less likely to be losing to normal Navis. And unless they were a jerk that wanted to preserve their trade secret, they could in turn learn from them where to get one. All in all, this is a smart Neto episode, as brought to us by Masashi Kubota. And sure enough, Neto happens to find one where that is the case, with his friends and Mariko watching the exchange? Did she do something with her hair? Maybe a change in makeup? Actually no, as the story reveals, this is the first appearance of Miss Yuriko, Mariko's twin sister, who is in fact working with the Darkloids, and using the guise of her nice, kindly sister to move around unnoticed amidst the populace. Not that the show reveals all of that at this time. What was up with Yuriko was more of an extended arc throughout Axess, with viewers presented the mystery of, with the relationship between the two. It's really only those fans that had played Battle Network 1 that would realize, hey, wait, didn't Miss Mari have a twin sister in that game that taught at a school centered in the city? And then come to realize they'd given the individual a complete overhaul into a new incarnation that allowed her to have an actual tangible character in her own right when she came to be used in the anime series. as opposed to just creating yet another character that would not have these advantages. World building. This series could at times be really smart with it, as it had to spend more time expanding on it than the games could. Initially, though, the show was trying to sell the possibility of this being Mariko instead, trying to pull the fake out that this might be what Mariko's like when she lets her hair down, and the somewhat ditchy school teacher might have more to her than might first appear, that she hides behind a carefree persona. Had they gone that route, it still would have worked with how this was being executed, as I have seen other series where that works. But taking advantage of the sister thing instead, I feel was a bigger boon, as it allowed them to play with that idea and deception, seed doubt in the audience's mind that would engage them to see if that was true, and then pull the grand reveal that there's just a twin out there with her face that decided to take a walk in the dark side, with following elaboration making it not feel like they were copping out about it. And players of the games could in turn showcase that they didn't necessarily pull this out of thin air for a cheap twist.
やっぱり見間違いか。
世の中には自分そっくりの人間が3人はいるって話よ。
And sound. Most of my relatives think I sound exactly like my dad, just a bit more nasally. But yeah, the kid with the hostile Navi has a dark chip, and when the Navi goes berserk, the dark chip overloads the PET, destroying it and causing the operator's Navi to run off, having been turned malicious due to the influence of the dark chip, and separated from their former partner as a new solo Navi and Darkloid. As Neto retrieves the dark chip, the operator runs off, seeing Yuriko in the background leaving and chasing after her, with Yuriko also realizing that Neto might have caught sight of her from the operator's reaction, her calling her boss to report this, who in turn decides to test the young net saver to allow Yuriko a chance to fade into the background while abandoning this means of dark chip distribution now that they've been made. Neto does ask Mariko, though, if she was there, the series attempting to see the sister story here with her almost revealing it, but being cut off by the school bell that requires them to prioritize the daily grind. Another smart thing to keep the mystery that was the Hook arc going, instead of just letting it all out at once. The scenes of Mariko at school intercut with jumps to Yuriko distributing more dark chips to net battlers that makes their Navis turn evil. These cuts done in such a way that it infers that this isn't occurring simultaneously, but instead over time, once more distorting perception of whether they are the same person or meant to be different. Rin and Kifune discuss the results on the analysis of the dark chip Neto brought in, and it doesn't look good. A lot more chips with their exact signature are popping up all over the place, with seemingly no pattern to them. Meijine's analysis in turn showing that when it powers up a Navi, it does so by consuming the emotional data of said Navi, severing the AI's feelings of possessing a bond with their operator, and turning those feelings inwards, allowing them to act with sociopathic malice.
そっか。あのナビ、心が壊れたから、あんなひどいことは。
In trying to find the operator from before, Neto sees him confront Yuriko, who Neto again mistakes for Mariko despite how her hair is styled being into a twisted ponytail instead of curls, and thus overhears that operator identify her as the distributor. He tries to confront her, but she flees with the power of parkour, her long black jacket obscuring her features enough that Yuriko can slip into her disguise as her sister, only tipped off by how her hair reminds one of croissants instead of egg rolls. You can see how this would be an effective disguise, too, as I joked about earlier. People wearing their hair differently on different days is a thing, after all. We just don't see it much in anime, though it has slipped in more as time's moved on, because consistent appearance in character models is often used as a visual shortcut due to everyone being drawn in a consistent art style in a given series that can't draw out distinct facial features. Thus, we look for different visual cues to catch who is who. For the twin sister thing, when the twin sister angle can't be presented through facial features, a minor stylistic difference with regards to hair when one is trying to look like the other makes the most sense for a visual cue to give the audience what wouldn't in turn tip off those around them. Though it could make less sense in other series depending on the visual cue. An example, Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc V could get downright silly with how the dimensional counterparts Yuya, Yuri, Yugo, and Yuto all had the same face, but wildly different hairstyles and dress sense. And yet the characters in the show had difficulty differentiating the four despite those visual cues. It was worse with Yuzu and her dimensional counterparts in that show, as then they took body type into account as well, yet still treated them as all being identical. And yeah, she uses this to throw Neto off her trail and lead him into a trap by faking Mariko being abducted by the true culprits, pretending to lock herself in a freezer while still in disguise to allow her Navi, Needleman, a chance at deleting Rockman in battle in the same way said Navi eliminated the other Net Police's Navis. After all, they wouldn't be able to distribute them to the unawares if it became common knowledge what the consequences of their use are. Then again, in the real world, there'd still be idiots and conspiracy theorists that would dismiss reports of the damage they do as fake news. I really feel like we're in the worst timeline sometimes. If you're wondering, the odds are Needleman and Yuriko have more of a working relationship between them that is different from the bonds the dark ships normally destroy. That's why Yuriko can have a Navi that can appear to use one without going completely rogue. But by this point, Neto and Rockman have gotten more used to finding dark ship enhanced Navis, so it's up to Needleman's unique skills to screw over chances of an easy win. Thus, they've got to do something fast to save Mariko. This releases the lock, letting her out, but Neto focusing on Mariko lets Needleman get in several more hits, leaving Rockman at a disadvantage, which allows Yuriko's true plan to show itself, offering Neto the temptation to use the dark ship himself, lest Rockman be deleted. And the scene is good. It is well-paced, the music ramping up the tension, appropriately dragging out Neto's hesitation, as if he's actually considering it and weighing the pros and cons of that action. However, yeah, you're going to have to wait until stream to actually see the character's Dark Soul. Plot point. Hopefully I will remember to talk about this when we get to when it's relevant, but yeah, they had a much longer arc plotted out than is present in just Axess. And yeah, this is where Neto realizes that this is someone disguised as Mariko and not the woman herself, though that won't stop Yuriko from using this disguise in the future. But damn, can that woman jump. Though, to refute the idea that strength is all that matters, Neto finally pulls out his soul chips to turn the battle back in their favor, with Roll Soul buffing Rockman beyond the damage Needleman can deal, and Fire Soul would have dealt double damage to Needleman's elemental weakness, had Yuriko not withdrawn when she lost the initiative, slipping once more amidst the populace. With Neto running into Mariko again instead, and revealing she has, or rather had, a younger sister, who died when they were children. Leaving once more the question of how she still lives, as another familiar face lost in a crowd. The wrap-up. We have Doppelganger Syndrome, to the introduction of Yuriko Ozono and her use of her sister's identity as the disguise. We have same type attack bonus, to Needleman attacking with needles, and more needles. And we have superpowered evil side, the net navies that went bad due to a malicious power-up. This episode, as you can tell, is what I more expect from the series, with the arc revolving around Yuriko being another one that takes more than just this season to resolve, with an antagonist that bears a more complex backstory than the Dark Lords on their own bear, which is tied deeply into the main story's progression and resolution, while also answering the means by which normal navies that weren't already part of the Dark Light forces are getting infected. Or much like Bullman from the prior episode, how many navies may have come to join the Dark Light forces after abandoning their friends and operators. Yuriko's own motivations for this come to be revealed with time, as do her own moral standards, as she is later shown to have them, even if she is a bad guy here. And I really do hope to remember to talk about that when it becomes relevant too, as it does explain a lot about why things go the way they do with Axess, that once more is a part of the long game Araki and those in his camp with the series were trying to build. Sadly, context of that is unfortunately lost with the dub. Intentionally or no, while the dub of Axess was better and less revisionist than the former season, a lot of key parts of the dialogue were changed from what was being originally said. The result consequence being that, alongside stream not being important to Western markets, that said viewers were not given insight that something bigger was going on, or possibly being prepared for. It would be poor of me to address that now, unlike some things I normally end up giving away, but the best thing it reveals in the long term is the NetNavies aren't the only ones being corrupted by the power of dark chips, which we in turn will see with time. The Dark Lloyd's benefactor fires down the orbital launch form of the dimensional area converters, the devices touching down and forming the field around a bank, permitting Bubble Man access to it, where he is in turn stopped by a safe inside the safe. The idiot tries to take the safe with him, but of course the areas can't convert real matter into data normally. It really is limited to just battleships. Meijin asks Rockman and Neto to investigate why they would have done this and taken nothing, as Bubbleman reports his failure, revealing they were after a rare metal their benefactor is in need of. And with Bubbleman being incompetent, it means another Dark Lloyd has to go do it. After school the next day, as Mail offers to do homework with Neto, once more giving a reason why Neto should not be that behind in his classes, as a sect of the writers keep depicting him, but he gives away that he got another assignment, with her expressing once more the audience's frustration at keeping it secret in the way he does. Mail offering to help him out. Yeah, he's never going to be able to say no to her, as evidenced later by Patch. But the thing is, all Neto knows from what Meijin was given was that a dimensional area formed around the area, with no real sign of what they were targeting last night, leaving the pair to just wander aimlessly on patrol, which Mail unintentionally tries to turn into an opportunity for a date. Are the Net Police not paying him or supplying him with battleships he needs to fight off the Dark Lloyds? Cause I kind of think that'd be important to make sure he has the resources he needs to fight them effectively. Regardless, it keeps them within the region for long enough that a dimensional area manifests around the banks again. But there is in turn the downside, as Neto's stuck on the outside of the dimensional area, as Burnerman materializes himself. Which brings us to another aspect that is different with the areas the Dark Lloyds form, and that the boundaries of the fields are also hard-light holograms themselves. Meaning once one is formed, nothing is getting in or out until the fields dissipate. Coupled with it being very difficult to do anything to break a converter, it makes it so most times the Dark Lloyds and their viruses spawn that they won't be interrupted from whatever goal they're after. At least when it doesn't involve directly attempting to attack a net saver like Neto. This once more ramps up the tension for the series by presenting a new dilemma for Neto to overcome. For as I've said, in every incident so far involving a dimensional area, he's been in the middle of it and able to fight back. Now, not so much, as he's stuck on the outside where he is unable to do anything to help. Thus, this then forces the cast to ask the question, how do they overcome that, so their counteragents can strike back? And unfortunately, Neto just can't this time. Burnerman gets into the vault, melts open a hole in the safe, and takes from it the rare metal they were after. Though this is again a point where the show kind of loses itself, as Burnerman does actually manage to convert the entire metal piece into data to drag along with him. How is a good question on that front, considering if you can convert real matter into data and back again, you've effectively created teleportation technology. If this weren't a standard bad guy, congratulations! Patent that shit! But again, these are more supposed to be in line with generators that manifest hard light holograms, since the virtual world and cyberspace world is not actually a physical place. To be honest, the series does this rarely enough, and later parts of it do involve full-on matter data conversion both ways, that this isn't a big deal for me. Since what this rare metal is of a type that actually is supposed to react with varying electrical state to permit that type of conversion. The same types that actually make dimensional area conversion possible in this setting, as well as both that of the dark chips and synchro chips as a required reagent that, in the synchro chips case, is required for the matter conversion that helps the net navis manifest as a suit for their operators. Regardless, Neto was pretty badly shocked by hitting the wall of the field, waking up in male, Yuichiro and Meijin's care, the latter now having a better idea of what the target in the heist was. Though to contrast what I was just saying, the rare metal Yuichiro used to develop the synchro chips was as a slightly different type than the one Burnerman stole, meaning this reagent that is perceived as more useless than the one Yuichiro needed is more essential for dark chip production. And I think that detail was a bit of a mistake. It would have worked better for the parallels of the story had both synchro and dark chips required the same type of metal reagent for the physical construction. Yeah, the program version gets depleted after it's loaded onto a Navi temporarily, so it deliberately makes them to want to crave more. So that's unneeded there. But the physical version? It plays into some of the larger themes of the series about free choice, and that the decision to act good or bad is a choice, up until the point the ability to decide is taken from you by others. With the two paths being, do you value strength and individuality at the cost of connections and servitude to those supplying you with that power and doing anything to gain it? Or do you put your trust in someone to have people around you to support you? For some, it's not an easy choice, and would have fit well with the choice Neto was presented in the previous episode. That's how the Dark and Synchro chips could have better fit together, since that's what they're already doing, and making how a type of metal is developed result in both types be a flip of a coin of a difference. But that's not that big a deal. As I said, the rare metal is just a MacGuffin for the moment. In the here and now, the episode is focused on the dilemma of needing to get Neto through the outer barrier of a dimensional area in the event that one forms without Neto inside, to fight the viruses or Darkloid that will manifest within them. Fortunately, Scilab has been repaired enough that Yuichiro was able to set up his dimensional area research again, giving Neto a test model to try getting through the outer barrier with. Yuichiro thinking that it may be possible if Neto triggers cross-fusion at the right time as he's trying to pass through the barrier, then the transformation process will trigger, and the field that expands from him will allow the suit to form over his body, and in turn disrupt the barrier briefly due to the different types of hard-like holograms interfering with how one is forming within the other, letting him pass safely through it. Yuichiro demonstrating all this with the assistance of... Wait, is that a plush doll of Rockman in Saito style? Oh great, so Saito style did make it into the series. That's rather nice to see. They weren't cross-advertising the show merchandise with this, were they? I'd rather just prefer if it was a sight gag. Regardless, this allows Neto to train to do this in safe conditions in order to figure out not just the timing by which to properly pass through it, but also avoid any severe damage he might take by trying to do this in an actual life or death situation. But as the group comes to realize, well, even when they get the timing right, Neto is neither fast enough or his young body capable of exerting enough force upon the barrier for him to get enough clearance for the transformations field to even partially encompass his body and force him deeper within the barrier. Even trying it with his skates on to build up more speed just isn't enough to do it. I'd say maybe they should requisition for him a motorcycle and road permit, but honestly, unless you're a common rider, well, henshin heroes and two-wheeled forms of transport just do not seem to mix. Fortunately, Neto does have another chance at Burnerman. The Darkloid's benefactor has informed them that more rare metal that they need to collect will be arriving soon, meaning a face-off is inevitable, as soon as they can figure out how to get him through it properly, as the barrier around the actual areas are thicker than the ones available in the lab, which Yuichiro was able to supply. Fortunately, Neto realizes the key, that there are other ways to build up speed than what a body itself can exert. such as is exemplified by centrifugal force, but also from acceleration due to gravity acting upon your body. Thus, they find a machine in the area they can use as a ramp, which he can build up the speed from, which he uses to breach the barrier, and finally get inside just in time to stop Burner Man from getting more of the rare metal.
どうしてここに？
お前たちがディメンショナルエリアを張って中と外を遮断しても必ず俺は入ってやる。
Though the downside of fighting an elemental Navi like Burner Man is, well, Burner Man has the possibility of doing real serious damage to Neto permanently due to the effect of what extreme heat and fire have on flesh. Thus, this is one of the worst matchups for what could be summoned to the real world, even with Aqua Chips available, and especially due to Burner Man's tendency to charge his opponents wrapped within burning jets of flame. Enough water can still put them out, but then you have to worry in the real world about steam explosions. Fortunately, the bubbler chip deals enough stab damage to force Burner Man to retreat, but with it so late at night, well, saving the world may be done with for the day, but Neto's had no time to actually deal with doing his homework.
どうしよう。
Yeah, thought not. The wrap-up. We have Get Under the Dome, for something that really could have been addressed earlier if they had wanted to. We have The Heist, for the plan of the week being just to steal some stuff from a bank. We have Training Arc, for Neto finding a way to get into a dimensional area field. We have Brick Joke, for Neto being prevented from being able to do his homework due to responsibilities that took priority over it from the plot of the week. If you want to show Neto struggling at classes because of everything going on, then this is a far better way to deal with it. Such is actually a recurring trope that no one then tries to help the person that saved the world on the matter of their mundane activities, and is a bit of a pet peeve of mine, as being bad or prevented from focusing on schoolwork is a consistent and fraudulent narrative shortcut used by many writers to depict someone as an idiot. Case in point, Hibiki Tachibana in Symphogear, even when such is not the case. This is once more one of the better episodes so far, doing a few different things with the cast available that hadn't been addressed, showing that Yuichiro is on point in figuring out the dimensional check, getting Meijin in on the sight gags, once more depicting Neto's quick on their feet, but ironically the problem in the episode more seems to be male, in that they claim they want to help, and yet are just there, not really contributing much of anything beyond another tease in the long arc about their affections towards Neto. As much as I have repeatedly said I hate how anime writers depict Neto as an idiot, well, male isn't much better this time around. Though I do more appreciate the screwed over via circumstances route with regards to the Neto dynamic on this one, as opposed to the prior bashing. We open with the introduction of Searchman, with him sniping cyberspace as he battles Shadow Man? Okay, what is he doing here? Well, whatever he's after, he's managed to hijack the security navis for the system they are in, whom Searchman deletes without hesitation despite their being allies. Yeah, the actor illusion makes me wish a different Jun Fukuyama character had actually managed to do that. Then again, maybe all he needs to do is be framed for a crime he didn't commit to get some real friends. Jun Fukuyama played both Lelouch v. Britannia in Code Geass and Phantom Thief of Heart Joker in Persona 5. Surprisingly, Shadow Man appreciated Searchman's professionalism, withdrawing, for now. Searchman realizing he was after his country, Sharo's, main server control for a system called Control X, as ordered by the Dark Lloyd's benefactor. While Dark Miyabi will be paid later, when the series finally introduces the guy, a down payment is given in the form of 5 Dark Chips. After all, a capable Navi like Shadow Man? Best to get him hooked on them now, before his own discipline would be able to overcome the initial withdrawal of the first one. But even if he doesn't use them, well, the job needs to be done.
コントロール X さえ破壊されれば我々ネビラの衛星の位置を発見するものはなくなる。
Neto, in the meantime, is attending an airplane festival, highlighting the newest, most modern developments in flight technology, as well as historical planes.
あっちにあるのはライト兄弟の世界初の動力飛行機。
Surprising that the Smithsonian let it out of their museum. Then again, it could be a reproduction made for international events like this. Yeah, I actually saw the Wright brothers exhibit in person when I visited DC in 2019. It was really nice. However, at this exhibition is also a demonstration of the Control-X program, where it's explained what it actually is. An advanced air traffic control and surveillance system that can track all objects in flight the world round, enabling far safer traversal of flights as it tracks objects even up into space via an extended network of international satellites, which is what has Nebula concerned, as thus far, their personal satellite has remained undetected. I'm guessing it has a new means of detection beyond the standard conventional ones which said satellite would normally be shielded against. NASA and other space administrations in the real world already coordinate with air traffic control networks to prevent planes or anything else in the air from potentially being hit by anything falling from space. Hell, they already keep track of the movements of different satellites placed in orbit to make sure everything that is up there doesn't collide with one another. That's something they've done since the 70s. But sure enough, this is where Shadow Man and his personal virus army come in, to try and break the system and cause an accident at the festival which would mar support for the system. Airport networks and airplanes themselves are highly firewalled due to the dangers of even one plane crashing could bring. And it jumps priorities so much that Meijin immediately calls Neto the second the report is distributed. And thus, he's on the case as he's literally already there. However, as Rockman deletes the virus threats, we see how Shadow Man turned the security navies in the previous incident. The dark ships he got were to be used in the other navies. I think those are more security navies than Shadow Man was given dark ships to turn with. You could have shown a smaller number of security navies being infected, then turning on their own number. That's a bit more destructive, a bit of chaos for Shadow Man to then take advantage of to attack unnoticed until it's too late. Cause this way, there's a lot more present a plot hole. So now we have the standard hero's dilemma of whether or not we should kill someone who has been brainwashed into doing something malicious to save the victims they will create. Take a moral stand and not stain their own hands with blood, or try to find a way to save both. Fortunately, for Rockman at least, there is a pragmatist available to make the decision for him. No, I'm not playing the Euphemia clip. And for the record, this was the right choice in this situation. There isn't a way currently to remove the infection of dark chips. Either they won't return to themselves when the chip wears off before calamity will happen, or they won't return at all and will be stuck in this state. These are lesser AI navies made specifically for security purposes. They can be restored from uncorrupted backup programs. But what always annoys me about what results from these kinds of stories is that a person is treated as being weak for taking a moral stand about not wanting to murder victims of someone else just because those victims are being used as pawns for another's machinations. As being unable to fight them to save others is a legitimate catch-22 where there is no easy solution, which the villain is deliberately placing a moral hero in. Oftentimes, unless you're stuck in that situation yourself, you don't know what you will do, and shows the strength of the principles you stand by. To not have empathy in such a situation and hesitate shows one of two things. Either sociopathy or dedication to a given cause, which is what we have with Searchman and how easily he pulls the trigger to stop them, as his dedication to protecting the larger world is greater than the emotional cost that would weigh upon him for destroying navies that literally can be restored from on-site backups. To say nothing about the training even a navi like this would have had to go through before this. Now, there is the extreme opposite of this situation as well, which, ironically enough considering Jun Fukuyama's playing the pragmatist in this event, also ends up represented in Code Geass, a person who so strongly believes in their morals that they will dictate terms by which they will bother to fight for and protect someone, and if those they wish to help violate those terms, they'll just kill them themselves. That kind of moral person deliberately turns a blind eye to suffering of the people and what's needed to help them, just because it doesn't sit well with what it might mean for their values that their own actions allow and propagate that suffering to occur. But of course, that's all a discussion for later when I eventually publish my thesis on Code Geass, that is currently scripted to be over 4 hours long. And here with this series, that wouldn't apply at all to begin with. Searchman and his operator Rika are soldiers. They've been trained to have to make hard choices for the benefit of the people they have sworn their lives to. Rockman and Neto, by comparison, are specifically deputized civilian children who are only meant to act against those who are performing the deeds of actual malice. They haven't been trained to deal with these sorts of circumstances, so of course they're going to hesitate. My issue with these matters where I think writers screw up, as has been consistent within my reviews, is when an adult acts irresponsibly to their duties they take on that gets people killed because they refuse to make a meaningful choice or deliberately make the wrong one, knowing that was the wrong one, and bend over backwards to justify that wrong decision, which would have saved lives had they not prioritized their morals over people they could have saved. Or has been happening throughout this specific review series, a writer emphasizing the "they're children so they must be imbeciles" school of writing younger characters, not realizing that just because they're lacking in life experiences does not mean the characters are brain dead. But yeah, I'm not ragging on Neto or Rockman for not being able to pull the trigger on this. There is legitimately no justification for saying they should have, as that is not something they should have been expected to do. But by proxy, it is also wrong to try and put Searchman in the wrong for doing so since, again, they are Navis that can be restored from backups. It certainly shouldn't have been a first choice option, but Searchman has already had to deal with Shadowman's same stunt and several other Control-X facilities around the world which had been destroyed in the same manner. He already knows there was no saving those Navis without a greater loss of casualties, and thus had to do the dirty calculus of war.
他に方法があるのか。ダークチップのボートと化した奴らを救う方法はデリートする以外にない。
At least, again, at this point in the series.
戦いは非常である。くだらん情けは自分の命を失うぞ。
And again, this specifically is the part I hate about these kinds of stories that I preemptively went off on this tangent about. Because violence is not strength, and compassion is not weakness. But it's important to know when to apply each respectively. When we have this specific divide between characters in varying shows, though, it always breaks down the same way, and that the show treats the two as complete absolutes to show the compassionate one is weak, and the one who shoots without hesitation to save others being the complete asshole lacking a semblance of empathy, when it's more complicated and nuanced than that. I'll give the show this, though. I honestly prefer this take on the Searchman-Rika pair, as it's clear that there is an ideological and priorities difference that needs to be overcome, as opposed to the game's incarnation, where the pair instead have a massive stick up their ass and have to inflict themselves and their views on others. Searchman asking Rockman what he should have done differently shows they are open to other means, but none were available. It's just that line about compassion, the following declaration that'll kill anyone who gets in his way of his orders, that are the steps too far that writers concerning these matters constantly, and I do mean constantly, overreach with. I get that Japan has a general loathing of the military as nothing but government-approved murderers, and they're not entirely wrong. But it often forgets the reason why career soldiers actually exist, and that should be to protect the well-being of the people. Not the land, not the economy, business, or financial assets of a given nation, but the people. Which is why following this, that Searchman refuses to help when Shadowman creates a distraction by attacking one of the planes of the Control-X network to try and trick the two Saber Navis away from the central program, that the way his refusal to help irritates me. He can tell that this is a trap, that people's lives are being endangered in the short term to endanger more in the long term. But the problem is that is not what he says to Rockman when they are more than capable of splitting duties, with Searchman guarding the control point, while Rockman focuses on saving the endangered civilians. There is literally no reason to showcase him acting like this outside of artificially creating unnecessary conflict between them. As, for the most part, Rockman can handle Shadowman on his own. At least until Shadowman finally gives into temptation and uses a dark chip himself, with Searchman watching the entire affair from the separate server. Because This is Searchman's ability, to snipe beyond the limits of the virtual walls of cyberspace.
Target. Delete.
However, despite the apparent failure of this operation, Shadowman's activities did buy the Darkloid's benefactor enough time to complete a stealth system that will hide their satellite from even Control X's detection, meaning this is a net zero gain for the day. With at least Rockman apologizing for being overly judgmental towards someone that has different responsibilities than themselves. The wrap-up. We have the Man from X, for Searchman coming over for an international special agent team-up. We have Brain Control! Ironic once more because Jun Fukuyama was guest starring this week. And we have Morality Play, for the argument between the two Navis and their different ideologies. Despite my tangents on this one, this is not a bad episode, and I hope I impressed that my problems with it are not against this episode in specific, but at the same type of problematic depiction that gets thrown out across media a lot that tends to use these plots in the same damn extremist ways that lack any real identification of nuance. To this episode's credit, both characters are in the wrong with how excessive the positions they take are, and by the end there is still shown that their view is not an absolute. Searchman showing the empathy needed to help out Rockman, and Rockman admitting that Searchman wasn't in the wrong for taking the actions he did, even though there are ones Rockman himself could not take. It is actually bad media, such as the series Ryuki, that says killing someone is bad no matter the circumstances, even in ones where not doing anything causes others to die. It is moral cowardice to claim such situations are an absolute, as it showcases the person making such declarations are not themselves a moral person, but making excuses to deliberately not do the right thing. We'll be seeing Raika and Searchman more as the series progresses, and we will be introduced to Raika in a few episodes as well, but suffice it to say the two are going to become staples of the show soon enough. So it is still good to show that they themselves are flawed characters with room to grow. And for them, it certainly is at how they place overimportance on fulfilling orders, and not thinking of the ways in which they could better fulfill them in spirit, but not necessarily by the letter of them. We open once again, because this is a Kenichi Yamada script, on fucking padding. Not on rush racing to reach a limited release type of chocolate shaped like a bone. So I'm guessing since Rush is an AI dog, that the chocolate is poisonous to dogs thing wouldn't apply. I'm guessing Yamada's never had pets. This race almost ends up killing Neto, when he ends up bumping straight into a dimensional area barrier hidden within a building that has no other sign that it's there. Neto managing to rebound into the barrier now that he's had time to train his body to improve his speed in piercing it. Neto reports the incident, the following Net Police raid, finding the building was being used to transport and store large quantities of physical dart chips for later distribution worldwide. A huge break in their case, as their production facility cannot be that far from the safe house, that Neto only found by accident. This earns him unending praise for how big a deal this find is, even from people outside the Net Police who don't know Neto's a net saver, which starts to go to his head. After all, aside from one meetup with his fellow net savers where he was more at the forefront of beating their enemies, Neto's basically been waging a one-man war against their operations as far as he knows. It is understandable. It would start to get to him after some point that he's being recognized as specially talented at this, both considering his age, and with context of everyone around him infrequently treating him like an imbecile, when that isn't showcased half the time, and the subsequent refusal to help him not be like that getting unconditionally positive feedback for once from everyone around him would result in that kind of reaction. Regardless, Nebula, as the Dark Chip Syndicate has finally been named within the series for me to refer to them by that, actually has more storehouses than the ones Neto found. So they can afford to lose the stockpile there. But they're not above trying to punish Neto for making them lose their resources. Thus gets Shademan to send out one of his Dark Lords to attack him, as Neto in turn is convinced that he can't stumble across a dark chip factory in the region in the same way he stumbled across that stockpile, chasing that feeling of praise that, while not completely out of character, does tend to feel slightly excessive. After all, Neto has saved the world a few times already, and it didn't get to him like this. Or maybe it's just a delayed reaction with him realizing, hey, I'm awesome. Other people are finally recognizing how awesome I am. Let's keep showing everyone that. Which, hell, even adults have that reaction sometimes. Thus, it's understandable that sometimes anyone of any age needs a lesson in humility to drag them back to reality. Just, without requiring the person be humiliated to do so, as that just makes them not learn the lesson. But yeah, this is where Enzan comes in to, in part, humble him, or at least try to, revealing that he found another warehouse that was storing dark chips as well, with the one Neto had revealed to them being previously dismissed by their net police. And that while Neto did good here, it'd have been better if Neto had waited to see if he couldn't follow the viruses back to where they were bringing the dark chips from, to then get at the source of the problem, which they no longer have a lead on where that could be. Then again, that wasn't exactly possible for Neto to do with the information on hand, nor is that his job, as the net police have deputized him to fight and shut down navis and viruses using dimensional areas. He wasn't aware it was a storehouse to begin with. Thus, how was he supposed to know to be able to do that, when the only way in and to be able to try in the first place would have alerted everyone inside to his presence to begin with? This is where the episode thus shows more of its flaws. Neto is inexplicably acting over-arrogant over an achievement he didn't really earn, and the way his actions are being critiqued by Enzan, and by proxy Mail, are in the context of things that he had no way of realistically doing. Not because he is incapable of doing those things as he has followed people to the sources of problems before, but because in that specific situation, there was no awareness of the need or possibility to perform that given action. So there was no way to know that such needed to be performed. Thus, Enzan isn't wrong that actually finding the source would have justified that praise by and large, but no one slotted into that same circumstance would have been able to do better. However, Neto and Enzan catch sight of Yuriko, who is only barely trying to be in disguise today, with her still walking around in her normal clothes despite being dressed up like her sister, which immediately catches Enzan's suspicions as he's at least met Mariko before. And as I said before, Yuriko's disguise is an effective and understandable one. Still, talking to Enzan gives Neto the idea to look back over the warehouse for any clues that might have been missed or not been obvious, such as an email that was received since the place was raided. That, of course, is the lure for the Darkloid's trap for Neto. And because Neto thinks that due to the raid being publicized, they might already be in the process of evacuating the factory, understandably doesn't think to inform Meijin or anyone else. This doesn't come off as an egotistical, only I can do this thing either. Especially since, well, again, Neto's been the only one thus far in the series that has been able to fight anything that emerges into reality. So even if he did, he's not been wrong on that. But it definitely feels like a I've not been trained protocol, thus calling in to report a location I'm looking into has slipped my mind moment. Where again, I could see anyone doing that, not just Neto on an ego high. Said facility is an abandoned factory, the kind of place you'd think would be a high priority for the police to check out, while Enzan in turn manages to succeed in following Yuriko to a different location. Neto tries searching the facility he was led to, only finding the place covered in dirt and dust, and it's only by luck he finds a secret door, leading to just more dust, dirt, and sand. Oh, and also metal shutters sealing him in the room. While Enzan finds the place he in turn was led to was yet another storehouse, and this is Yuriko's scheme to get rid of both of them. Neto's been sealed in a room where he can't use cross-fusion to get out, which is summarily filled with sand. And Yuriko's already cleared out the factory, setting it to collapse around Enzan. Unfortunately for this plan to kill them, they did not think to remove the system jacks from the rooms so Rockman could save Neto regardless. Though with the sand pouring in stopped, it's shown that the entire battlefield is in fact the body of Desert Man, who drags Rockman beneath the sand and triggering a dimensional area. Wait, why? You could have trapped Rockman, then continue to have sand pour down on him while Rockman's occupied, preventing the two from coming together. Yeah, Navi in the real world invokes a bigger threat, but keeping them separated would allow either one or the other to lose the advantages needed to survive. And sure enough, that's what happens. Neto even calling out how Desert Man screwed over this plot by coming into reality. And just like Crocodile in One Piece, Neto finds Aqua Chips cause Desert Man's body to not be able to disassemble to avoid damage. But unfortunately, Neto isn't able to force Desert Man to retreat before the point he runs out of chips in the PET, and can't de-transform in the midst of battle in order to be able to load more to finish him off. And like in the game, you can only dodge Desert Man's attacks so much for so long before the damage starts adding up, cross-fusion failing them entirely. Fortunately though, there was someone compatible with the other Synchro chip. And it's time for Enzon to install a Mega Ranger. Yes, seriously, I've talked about Masaya Matsukaze's acting credits before. And yeah, Cross Fusion Blues looks great. Blues.exe was already a top-tier design, and adding another Mega Man Zero homage in the form of Enzon's hair extending down his body really sells it, as does Enzon's prior analytical abilities playing well off this situation, where Desert Man's true form was actually hiding in plain sight, forcing him to retreat, and the episode once more ending without a plot resolution? What the hell? And it's not even like this is continued on in the next episode, for as is a big problem with a number of episodes by certain writers in this series, is they don't have a proper conclusionary wrap-up to them, as if they don't know how to end it. Kenichi Yamada is certainly the most guilty of this, primarily as a consequence of how he wasted time at the start of a given episode, so he runs out of time and doesn't have to write a resolution for his plots afterwards. The wrap-up. We have no moral theater! To completely fail to resolve the Neto's ego needs to be popped subplot of the episode. We have Sahara Death Trap, for Desert Man attempting to bury Neto in the sand. And we have 11th Hour Rescue, for Enzon coming in for the save. And this episode likewise not explaining how he could, considering Yuriko left him in his own death trap that he just gets out of off-screen. This ends up not being a good episode, though it at least attempted to a point to be one. But the problems here are just in the inability to follow through what it seemed to be trying to do, and the resultant fridge logic of, hey, how did they set up all these things like this? And requires a contrived train of thought that Enzon, out of nowhere, suspects Neto's teacher of being someone she's not, which Enzon really shouldn't have any insight about, considering some people can't show up all over a city. That, after all, is the strength of Yuriko's disguise in the first place. All in all, despite the premiere of Enzon's cross-fusion form, it leaves a lot to be desired, leading other writers on staff to do cleanup, since this writer didn't. So to start us off this time, we have Neto being a jerk about the whole Enzon having a synchro chip thing, revealing that Enzon's test with the system actually went very well, since it's only been recently that Yuichiro could get good data on it after his lab finished being rebuilt, and the synchronicity between Enzon and Blues being higher than that between Neto and Rockman, for a variety of reasons. As I've gotten into before, Enzon and Blues' connection as operator and Navi takes on the form of a master and servant relationship due to how Enzon's own upbringing instilled that onto him. Thus, it's Blues falling in line to sync with Enzon, and it not taking the form of a true cooperative pairing. Thus, it's kind of the Sixth Ranger effect, where they start off with this higher starting power tier, but because of that have less room to grow and improve. What this series has been trying, and depending on who's writing any given episode, failing to showcase is how Neto, as a flawed person, has more room to grow and improve, and as the protagonist, more avenues by which to do so. In the good episodes of this series, we see that as Neto takes on a new responsibility and broadens his horizons. Enzon, by comparison, dude already has a lot on his plate and has been in the thick of things in his own way. But beyond him appearing to be strong, we don't really get why he got singled out for the net saver job in this version of events, since he was already the vice president of his dad's business. Yes, making him a net saver brings him in line with his video game counterpart where he's already this genius net battler that's been deputized as an official net battler for the game's version of the Net Police. but this isn't actually cohesively connective to that. It took Neto saving people's lives using cross-fusion to be brought in and earn the badge. What did Enzon do to earn his in turn? But yeah, this is part of that pop the ego bubble the last episode failed at. Since now, Neto's not special. The rival he's already worked hard to beat has seemingly surpassed him again, after the last time he came in to help, where the two seemed on better terms. To say nothing about them being friendly rivals last season, with things defaulting to the two acting like jerks to one another once again. And Neto is just petty here with how he refuses to accept that reality after he was getting out of place arrogant last episode. But unfortunately it goes from bad to worse, as this is one of the returning episodes for Yaito Ayano Koji, with the series explaining that, like Dekao, she got shipped off to another country. In her case, she and her father moved for the time being to Kingland so he could oversee another division of his company, causing her to be able to live out a princess fantasy as, well, her dad's game company has been working on an otome game, which she's advertising for them. And some men, no judgment here. All routes lead to doom. This is where Yaito, having hacked her friends' email addresses to pretend to be them, gets them to buy for her a bunch of Japanese exclusive items she can't get in Kingland. It is called Import Middleman Services. She's rich. She can afford next day delivery. White Rabbit, Mandarake, World Shipping, Hobbylink Japan, CD Japan, Play Asia. These are all middleman services I use when I want to get something from Japan. Less so Hobbylink Japan in my case because their pricing for shipping is terrible in comparison to either what Mandarake offers or just waiting for USA Gundam Store, New Type, Big Bad Toy Store, or Amazon to get it in. But still, you don't have to fucking lie to your friends who you're going to kidnap anyways to get it to you instead of getting one of her fucking maid army to do it or ask her friends politely to bring some along. I'm betting she didn't even fucking reimburse Neto for the cost, cause that's the kind of rich brat she is. And yeah, after the whole party arrives, she somehow got an elevator in the local arcade tricked out to being an intercontinental ballistic missile that for some reason transformed into a robot that rockets Neto, Mail, Mariko, and the Navis halfway around the world. Like, ignoring how the G-forces should have left the group splattered on the bottom of this fragile metal box. I would say this could be written off because of Yai's house transforming into a giant robot, and the other Kawakuri tricks her family's capable of, due to everything else we've seen already of the ludicrous nature of their stuff. But no, this is entirely new tier of what from them. I'd actually forgotten about this specific bit, as again, she could have just called for an assist instead of kidnapping them under false pretenses. Like, even the group acting appropriately for Yaito being completely out of fucking line doesn't absolve this for me. As well, it's lampshading that reality. Of course there's going to be no consequences for this. Which thus makes the sight gags pulled after to kill time just not work either. Again, import service. Or better yet, find a small-time shop in an Asian district. I'm absolutely certain they'll stock them, as shops like that thrive off of exclusivity. So yeah, if anything, Yaito's gotten worse with her absence, not better. With it taking forever for her to get to the point of the other reason why she called. And it happens to be a repeat of one of the earlier plots of Season 1. The game she had her dad's company make has had its data stolen by a virus despite how established it was that the mansion is like Fort Knox for computer data already. And she needs their help getting the data back before the game ships in the morning. Once again forcing me to ask, has no one printed a master copy or backed up the development data? Because the final product is just one small piece of an entire production line, and if it ships tomorrow, you already need to have physical copies made months in advance. Or if it's available on a digital storefront, that storefront also needs to already have that data on its servers with it just toggled to not be viewable or purchasable by the public yet. So yeah, this has officially devolved into idiot plot as Yaito gets them to hunt for it with assistance of her maid army and whatever nonsense the episode decides to throw in.
でもちょっとやりすぎなんじゃ。今日中にデータが戻らないとゲームができないのよ。
Or maybe that was at the hand of the episode's director, Harume Kosaka, since Kosaka, well, they waffle on whether their stuff focuses on fan service, and a few blinking and miss it shots of Yai's maids in this episode certainly qualify for that. Then again, they also worked on Sailor Moon, Cutie Honey F, and Persona 4 the animation, so they have done good stuff both before and after this. So for all I know with all the sight gags, they're taking advantage of the absolute excess of nothing to at least try and be creative with the presentation. But it's not working. And worse, spending so much animating those sight gags basically ate the budget for the animation for the episode, meaning most of the rest that's here is extremely lazy in how it's presented. And I mean still frames, skipped animation, and scene wipe lazy. The virus that took it is eventually found in a cake shop. Again, too far! And by the time those viruses are cleared out, the actual culprit has gotten away, leading to the next destination that all once more seem to be themed around Yaito's obsession with strawberries. However, eventually they just start to catch on that this virus keeps showing up at all of Yaito's favorite places in the region, where they're revealing that the important bit of data that got nabbed is data based on her, as she's the princess of her video game. Because, of course, she is. Like, I'm not judging her for that. A lot of writers put themselves into their works either metaphorically or through a personal XP. But did it have to be one for one? But it gets them to think proactively to ask, where would Yaito be next? With her leading them to her own personal castle.
このお城はパパがプレゼントしてくれたの。私の4歳のお誕生日に。
She's 10. And yeah, inside they find a life bit virus that's been corrupted by the data and been acting it out. They summarily kill it with the evil cut program advance, showing the princess is the same spoiled brat Yaito is. And with the game's release, that the villains of the game are all based on the very friends she dragged in to save her game's release. Yeah, free tip, never put exact XPs of people in your life into your creative works, especially without their knowledge. It never turns out well, and they can sue you for libel. The wrap-up. We have Stay Gone. To the request that this interpretation of Yaito please stay the hell out of the series. I know she appears more later, but I really wish she wouldn't. This one is a wash for an episode. I've made it no secret that I hate Yaito in this series, and Yaito Concentrate, as episodes like this are referred to, since it's no longer sprinkled across her appearances, helps to showcase why. This is not a good character. Her acts of selfishness are not endearing or purportedly adorable. She kidnaps people she cares about instead of asking them for help in a desperate moment, with them acting as her last-minute saviors for something important to her, and she proceeds to treat them like garbage. If that isn't a metaphor for the wealth class divide, I don't know what is. Comboed with how ridiculously extra and setting-breaking a lot of this is, I can't like her or episodes featuring her. Again, as I'll say with the series, ridiculous things like this are fine after they've been introduced as possible, but the originator's sin that messes with this show is always going to be the originating event, and that one is not. And the biggest problem with Yaito's material is, instead of even trying to stay consistent with what we've seen before, she and the plots around her always try to take that subsequent leap to being even more ridiculous in events following the previous insanity attached to her. Instead of leveling off, it somehow continues to climb further, so there's no end to the peak extra that is the nonsense around her, and not even in ways I feel can be enjoyed. Back in July, Dekao was once more working for the World 3 at Maha Niban as a delivery boy. Knowing this universe, though, it wouldn't surprise me if he ended up in a cryo-freezer until the year 30XX. On the plus side, I doubt he'd have to deal with the robot apocalypse on this side of the Mega Man timeline. His route takes him to an antique shop, where he spies a piece of old tech, which the owner tries to hawk to him instead of paying for the last 3 months of takeout, whose payment he keeps deferring. I'm pretty sure that's due on delivery regardless of era. I mean, I ordered takeout by this point by myself as a kid when this episode would have been airing in Japan. Dekao almost swears he recognizes this guy, though. But again, he tries to sell him the mystery box. So, what's inside the box?
Nothing! Absolutely nothing!
Actually, he calls the device a net wrecker, something designed to boost the power of net navies. The modern internet in this setting is literally 50 years old, and net navies were a creation of Yuichiro Hikari's. I mean, they were in the game's canon. The anime tends to waffle on the details of that a bit, considering a certain arc involving time travel that's presented in stream. Plus the implication they were actually creations of Yuichiro's father, Tadashi. And yeah, this is clearly a scam. And unfortunately Dekao falls for it, which does not please his bosses. Nor the fact that Neto and Co. are having a stopover on the island. As Yaita decided that with her vast, immense wealth, that she was not going to pay for the people she kidnapped to have a proper ride back, and only gave them budget seats on a flight back via coach. Dekao decides to look to see if the networker actually does anything. And yeah, the damn thing actually does work, turning Gutsman giant-sized, and into even more of a dumbass than he normally is. So, here's something that has bugged me ever since I saw this episode as a kid. How does the netwrecker even work? And I don't mean, how does it enhance navies? Oh no. My question is much simpler than that. You see, the advanced model PET came out literally months ago in the setting. We learned a bit that this netwrecker was made by Tadashi Hikari, and Neto's grandfather has been dead longer than Neto has been alive. And as anyone that owns a game console knows, that with exception to universal serial ports, the game controllers and adapters for any given created console are pretty proprietary and unable to be cross-compatible. The advanced model PET is shaped differently than any previous PET model due to recent advancements in technology that allowed Enzon's company IPC to make them more compact and efficient. Thus, how does this new model PET fit into a slot interface with this device when this device is at least a decade old, if not longer? Now, I would like to think this was an oversight on the animation side of things, as this episode actually is written by Kenichi Araki, whereas the animation director overseeing the animation staff this time was Naoyoshi Kusaka, who does have an inconsistent track record regarding visual continuity. And Rockman Axess was the first time he'd worked on this franchise, so he would not have known any better. I'm actually familiar with the guy for his other works for Zebek and Sunrise. Naoyoshi Kusaka having worked as a director on Zoids, Outlaw Star, Shaman King, Nadesico, and even the Macross franchise. And normally he is better than this, or at least any signs of visual discontinuity that may pop up won't end up hampering the story. Here though, it's a bigger deal because these PET models being new has been a relevant plot point before, and this thing working with them in this way doesn't make sense, unless it utilized a different means of connection than just shoving a PET into it as if it were a game cartridge. Visual continuity mistakes, most people are willing to forgive, as that happens quite often in TV and movies. The only time anyone makes it out to be a huge issue, however, is when the visual discontinuity gets in the way of the storytelling by invoking and creating plot holes the writer did not intend. And I feel the netwrecker here ends up being one of those. And yeah, netwrecker is appropriate as he wrecks the World 3 navies for real this time, making the World 3 crew realize that with this device, which remodels and optimizes the data of the AI interfaced with it as opposed to battleships that just give them new weapons, while they may finally have just gotten their advantage that would allow them to finally defeat Rockman. Thus, they lure Neto over for a battle when their flight hits the ground, making a big deal of the production and getting to accept the challenge. Though, didn't they say this was supposed to be an assembly hall and not a net battle arena? What the hell? Yeah, like I said, there's a lot of visual discontinuity in this episode. Hell, the PET models are drawn wrong. Neto when his is open, having these two odd triangular spikes jutting out of it, which, yeah, do not exist. Again, did the individuals actually animating things not have the visual references they needed? I don't know what went wrong here. But yes, Dekao triggers the Netwrecker, almost immediately turning his Navi into King Gutsman, and seemingly immune to Rockman's attacks. Though Gutsman's agility is once more made his Achilles heel, as his larger size makes him even less capable of actually catching Rockman due to the other Navi's greater agility. Thus, Dekao tries greater Navi augmentation using the Netwrecker, which overloads the device and makes Gutsman grow to Super Sentai Monster of the Week sizes.
プログラムアドバンススプレッドガントリプルスロットインハイパーバースト
And what is with program advances being nerfed all season? I like that we're seeing them more now, but it's usually just to see them end up being ineffective against what they're facing. Rockman's forced to log out, but Gutsman's size causes him to escape containment and enter Jawai's Net City, setting the stage for pure chaos, which leads the group to seek assistance from the antique seller to end this.
ああお前確かクッチャイナタウンの超激マズラーメン屋
Oh yeah, from that episode where Neto inexplicably didn't have an alarm clock to get up for those meat buns that were short production foodstuffs, and had the Cubman brothers' first appearance. He appeared for all of, a minute, and his prior con didn't make any sense either. Well, to make things worse, and have a full-on King Kong parody at this point, when Roll tries to calm Gutsman herself, he just grabs her in his hand and starts heading for the closest skyscraper. Why? It makes him feel taller. Anyways, as the store owner reveals, he got the damn thing years ago when a student down on his luck traded it for some of his family's awful ramen. Besides a base description of it, he claims to not have known what it did until now. Though who created it? Apparently Tadashi failed his English classwork. And it wasn't Yurichiro who would have sold it off. It really was Tadashi himself who did it in a fit of inventive irresponsibility. As I also said, while the Hikari family has been key to development of the worldwide network in the anime continuity, they were not pivotal to its invention here. Thus Navis and the net did exist when Tadashi himself was in college decades back. Thus why the Netwrecker as a concept and invention even works. It's just way too dangerous. Fortunately, Mariko comes in with the save, reminding the group about status ailments Navis can suffer due to certain battle chips, such as the bad spice chip that can make a Navi temporarily fall asleep, and in the interim, hopefully allow the Netwrecker to wear off before things get worse. They attempt this by the group collecting literally hundreds of battle chips containing that program data, and with Rockman flying around in the back of a burner virus, as you can do that in network transmission with the things, they try and carpet bomb the overgrown ape. I mean Navi. Look, let's just admit it right here. This episode exists because Kenichi Araki wanted to make a string of King Kong iconographic references. It works, Gutsman losing his grip on Roll, who ends this battle by also echoing Looney Tunes.
私があんなにお願いしたのに聞いてくれないガッツマンなんて。
Ain't she a stinker? With that, this stopover's done with, and everyone's allowed to go on back, Neto getting craved for the road for their trouble. The wrap-up. We only see 10 Bad Spice battle chips be slotted in, so for the massive amount of them they are shown collecting, those are the only ones I'm going to count. We have Hulk Smash! To Gutsman under the influence of the Netwrecker. We have Ancient Chinese Secret, huh? A category once more stolen from SF Debris reviews, for Dekao finding the Netwrecker in an ancient store run by a Chinese man. Aside from the visual discontinuity errors I was bringing up in this one, this episode is alright, giving us tangible insight into the creative genius Neto's grandfather must have been in this setting, that a piece of junk he created and sold on a whim could still cause that kind of chaos half a century later. After all, Tadashi Hikari is even less called back to and referenced in the anime than he was in the games. But just this little bit is a good hook that could be expanded on into more, if the show chose to. They really didn't, but lore building in the end is lore building, and lore building is important. Hell, this device implies that this might have been Tadashi's first attempt at creating a Navi augmentation system that could have later spun off into the battleship programs of the modern era, or the basis by which Rockman's own ultimate program could have been conceived. Or, even more importantly, where the origins for Pharaoh Man's power in this universe may have come from for him to be so beyond other programs during his short reign. Who knows? It's the possibilities that fascinate me with this one, which honestly makes it more intriguing than just the ultimate King Kong reference this ends up as. Higuri tries to host a net battle competition for those that run the stores in his shopping district to drum up business, both for himself and the others struggling kiosks and stores in the wake of the Darkwood incidents. Only problem is, no one has bothered to enter, for Higuri and the other owners have offered a really terrible grand prize for it, which is just a 10-pound bag of rice. And that's a prize not even these kids would be after. And things go from bad to worse for the district when their own brand of bad luck magnet takes the time to pass by. That being Shuko Kido, who is a very nice and well-mannered teen girl that is a continuous sad sack. And because she's a continuous sad sack, she doesn't pay attention to the things around her and gets into all sorts of accidents. And when she part-times at the stores, they then start experiencing the accidents themselves. It's actually why the district is having financial problems to begin with. The stores she helps out take hits they just can't get back from without more customers, which she has unintentionally scared away. The examples they list, though, seem more coincidental, as if they are misidentifying the causes of their poor luck and just blame a common correlative factor, instead of each person just suddenly having an off day, or end up distracted by a new employee they have to supervise in learning the ropes more intently than others, thus miss the attention required to maintain their own. Now, I can kind of get some of these characters buying into this, Chisao and Rush in particular, but Mariko? Seriously? The woman is a teacher. Has she not ever had to deal with kids believing a strange kid is bad luck, and had to debunk that so said kid wouldn't be bullied like this? I mean, I know it's the moral of the episode, don't isolate from you those who have done no deliberate wrong or act of malice, and she later speaks out in condemnation of the act, but still to buy into Higuri's spiel when he's had no in-person interaction with her either? She's better than this. It honestly doesn't surprise me that this is, in fact, a Mayuri Sekijima episode. Once again, looking up their productions, this seems to be a trope of theirs. That anyone slightly different has to be segregated from the normies and persecuted for it. Believe it or not, while I sung the merits of the series Cross-Age Rondo of Angels and Dragons during my review of Super Robot Wars V, Sekijima actually wrote one of the stronger episodes of the series dealing with and showcasing that exact arc for one of its major characters, and the psychological harm it can do to them, which accented the show's central core messages and themes. I've said before that Sekijima is one of the problem writers for this show, but it's because the recurring tropes of their style do not mesh well with the overall .exe timeline and the expectations of the character depictions that they have not handled well at all.
まるで怪獣扱いね。
This, though, this more fits in their wheelhouse, and the only ones sacrificed to motivate it are shopkeepers we won't really see again, as opposed to Sekijima constantly screwing over the regular cast members. And because of all the crap Shuko's experienced, hell, she wants the rice as a prize, as she and her orphan brothers are so broke right now, they'd want to stretch that week's worth of rice into a month's worth supply. But since she really can't win if there's no other competitors, Neto, Mail, and Toru decide to help her out by entering as well so they can fake losses against her Navi so she might win, and with that bit of confidence, maybe overcome that curse of hers, which even she has come to believe in and propagate herself as true, which makes those even open to being close to her want to distance themselves from her. It's showcasing a cycle of abusive behavior, where even those who did no wrong come to blame themselves for it. Such as how it starts raining literally the second she got here, as if she controls the water. And that's just wrong. Even more wrong to treat this as comedy. Not wrong to show it, mind you. You can write material like this in ways that make for a strong story about why people shouldn't be treated like this, as it then serves as an object lesson against that behavior. The thing is, if you present it the wrong way, though, you can end up either glorifying it, undermining representation of it, or have whatever subject matter you intend completely go over people's heads, to the point that what the character tied to doing something bad is supposed to be bad, and you're not supposed to follow their example. You'd be surprised how frequently that keeps happening in modern critical analysis of media where that isn't considered. I actually saw someone relatively recently think the book 1984 is bad because of what's showcased in the book, and missed the entire point of the message of the book saying, hey, isn't a society that makes all the fucked up horrible things in it's A-okay to do really bad? Let's do our best to make sure the real world doesn't turn out like it. With the companion to that being, oh crap, conservatives keep trying to make the real world like 1984. Why aren't we stopping that? Anyways, the competition gets started, with the 5, as Higure is also taking part, competitors being opened up to a battle royale matchup, which thus allows us to be introduced to Shuko's Navi, Aquaman, and his absolutely weaponized cuteness. I mean, how can you attack that face? Because, of course, the Japanese view of fanboys would make them default their depiction to being stereotypically sociopathic. How? Sure enough, their inability to want to attack Aquaman gets the better of them, and the 4 other Navis fall off the stage, meaning Aquaman is defaulted to being declared the winner. And the other shoe is... There it is. Still, thanks to Netto and Company's efforts before concerning how Higure locked himself to one path of thought to his own detriment, part of why Higure is actually being nice to Shuko overall is he sees the same thing happening to her. She's become too trapped in the idea that she's cursed and unlucky to be around, that anything good in her life will lead to worse calamities after, and that as consequence is becoming self-fulfilling. She'll deliberately sabotage anything good with a negative thought or act to follow, which is nothing but self-destructive. And as someone who has had to deal with that himself, it is good for Higure's own development to want to help her break from that, and want help from the ones who broke him from that himself to make sure he doesn't screw it up. How? And yet, here's where we get to the root of the matter of what causes all of Shuko's horrible bad luck to spiral. Aquaman. Yes, every time Shuko gets overdramatic and starts to cry, Aquaman gets in his head the idea that, hey, maybe he can fix it. He then goes online and tries to correct something he can affect in cyberspace to resolve things, thus causing the calamities the other shopkeepers that had her on staff experienced. What can we say? The devil is a part-timer. In this case, Aquaman goes to the electric company and tries to hack it so Higure's shop gets back power, but ends up causing a mess when the security navis for the power grid come to arrest him, his specialized abilities allowing him to unleash an absolute torrent in cyberspace that forces all of the security navis out. And because he's acting independently, he doesn't know when to stop, which spirals into the power plant system regulation being all messed up, meaning the power plant's core could end up exploding. As always, when this type of thing occurs in fiction, there is a reason the primary control systems to all power production plants worldwide are not connected to a network and are otherwise maintained as isolated systems, for the simplicity of knowing that nothing will get into it by which to potentially damage or destroy them. Like, when a plant has to shut down, it's usually because too much is being asked of it, or from a physical hardware failure, not a software issue because of exactly this concern. Thus, Netto gets Higure to help him in stopping Aquaman, Higure dragging along Shuko with them, as, with her being melodramatic and blaming herself as the devil girl, he's starting to get pissed off with her constant, woe is me, attitude. She caused the situation specifically because of this attitude, and Aquaman wanting to make her feel better because of it. So if she feels she is responsible, it's time to stop acting like that and take responsibility for it. For what has she done to stop being cursed? Nothing. She just sobs in a corner feeling sorry for herself, and that's not helping anyone. Least of all, herself. With other cursed characters, they hate their abysmal luck stat. They really do. but most choose to not be hampered by it and do their best regardless of that handicap, as they refuse to let their awful luck win. Shuko, on the other hand, has let it beat her down every chance it gets without a fight, and that is why it keeps getting worse, as she takes no action against it and thus lets it run wild. This is the self-destructive attitude I was talking about that needs to be addressed with her, and that is what Higure eventually snaps at her over in tearing down this mentality. The unfortunate side of this, though, is Aquaman's water attacks act as a barrier against their shots hitting, to the point even powerful chips aren't doing jack against him. It's once they confront Shuko's attitude, though, that they get the tip needed to stop her Navi. Plug the hole where water is released from it, and it should stop the waves it's releasing. Thus, to best target the hole...
なんだどうなってるんだサイコロボムエレクトードとウェアシューズを分かった
This shorts Aquaman out, returning the system to normal. And to make sure Shuko doesn't relapse into her prior mental state, Higure decides to take her on as a part-timer in a shop himself. Even though, as always, it doesn't seem like much was learned at all. The wrap-up. We have The Devil You Know, for Shuko's attitude towards her self-created bad luck. We have Aborted Tournament Arc, for the Shopping District tournaments. We have Cyberspace Tsunami, for Aquaman's antics at the end. We have Cursebreaker, for Higure trying to get through to Shuko. We have I've Got Soul, for Rockman gaining another soul form. And we have Actor Illusion for... Wait, am I reading this right? So, the dub kind of did a thing with Shuko and Aquaman that some people picked up on. Partly because by the time this was airing in the West, it was 2005. Chantal Strand was cast to voice Shuko in English markets. And she is better known to most people for being the original Bandai Ocean dub actress for Lacus Clyne and her body double Mir Campbell from the Gundam Seed series, as well as voicing Feld Grace in Gundam 00. Yes, yet another Gundam 00 cast member was part of this on either side of the voice cast line. And it is believed in reference to her role in Seed that Aquaman's English voice actor was chosen to be Matt Hill, the original English voice actor for Seed's protagonist and Lacus's paramour, Kira Yamato. Whether this is a jab at Kira being considered the most in-touch and expressive with their emotions Gundam protagonist or not, due to them not choosing to hide their inner turmoil in order to acknowledge and work through it, well, we're just gonna have to take a mulligan on analyzing that aspect of why he was chosen for this, and hand-wave it to Matt and Chantal consistently working well together. Which, by the list of other series they both worked on together, they do. By contrast, Shuko's Japanese actress Mamiko Noto is both better and less known. Her most notable role was that of Rin from Inuyasha, with subsequent roles, at least the ones from series I know, including Tiffania Westwood from Familiar Zero, perpetual background character Aisa Himagami in the Raildeck series, Moriko Morioka from Recovery of a MMO Junkie, and Skathach from Fate Grand Order. Her counterpart for Aquaman as well is Chiami Chiba, who is otherwise best known for being Doremi Harukaze in Ojamajo Doremi, and by comparison not much else of note, to the point that her tenure as Aquaman is considered one of her largest roles. Which is kind of unfortunate, as while Shuko and Aquaman are recurring characters for the rest of the series, it's not exactly a high point for their career. Matt Hill and Chantal Strand, outside of their Seed characters, at least did other things they're noted and known for. Beyond that, though, well, honestly, this is the best episode Mayuri Sekijima has written for the series thus far. There's an actual nuanced message critique here, both in regards to how someone can self-sabotage themselves, and how society around them can make it worse. And you get a positive spin on Sekijima's frustrating insistence on the status quo being shot, with Higure being the one to push forward this change, while still introducing the character in such a way that Neto can build a rapport with her to eventually allow him to access Aquasoul. This one thus was overall a decent outing, and it's the first one to give Neto a Blue Moon-based Soul Unison as well, since thus far all the others have rooted themselves from Red Sun. But it's not the only one in this block. After all, next on the docket is the opportunity for a savage rematch. Deep in the internet, Beastman awakens. Cutting deep power lines as the Beast seems to be going a bit feral. I mean, it has been a while since we've seen him. Going feral as he's not had a chance to fight makes sense. Actually, I'm not that far off. Him not being used for any attacks means he's not gotten any dark chips for use. Meaning that due to the drug allegory nature of the devices, Beastman's suffering withdrawal. He demands a dark chip from their benefactor directly, who acquiesces, but one is not enough anymore, meaning he's no longer going through Shademan for their service. And what the benefactor needs Beastman in specific for is another plan to eliminate Neto, Yuriko once more disguising herself as her sister. Though to be fair with this one, the way her hair is blowing in the wind somewhat disguises the fact that this is Yuriko to even the audience initially, the tip-off being her purple lipstick. And as I've discussed before with this, the twins thing, alongside real people being capable of changing up their style if they want to, makes Yuriko's disguise more legitimate than some others I could name. Like, say, Arsene Lupin III's extensive use of elaborate prosthetics that really should look fake to people, but don't to us because it's animation. Anyways, yeah, Yuriko leads Neto and Mail into the trap at the Sea Tower, a facility built out in a bay area as a showpiece for the capabilities of overwater building and the capability of modern techniques to resist water damage. A bit of hubris there, considering Japan's propensity to be hit by storm surges and tsunamis. It's still better to create artificial islands by transferring actual soil to build up a landmass, like they did with Odaiba. One day I'm going to visit Odaiba just to see Gundam-based Tokyo. Fortunately, the entire facility is just an exhibition hall, so it's not like something like this is regularly populated, outside of when it hosts exhibitions, which it does this day due to the World Attractions Fair that's happening that drew the group's attention. It's basically a giant international flea market, but this is also where things get complicated. See, while Yuriko brought Mail and Neto for her boss's trap, Mariko is also here with Toru and Chisao for their Hot Springs club, as they're also having an exhibition towards Hot Springs on another floor, and Yuriko was not aware of that. Hell, despite sharing the appearance, she's so dissociated from her sister's life, she wasn't even aware this was a thing she was into for this to screw over the easy way of executing their plan. Which, to be fair, Murphy's Law is a thing for a reason. How was she supposed to know? Now this does rankle Neto's suspicions that Yuriko might be the imposter among us, but with Mariko staying focused on another floor of the facility, it's not like it's an easy tip-off of immediately seeing the other. Plus, Neto ends up distracted by the sexiness that is Tamako Shiraizumi at the expo to promote the Ura Inn and find some strong international net battlers to challenge. Just as expected from the adorable Momo Yayorozu lookalike battle freak that she is. See? She knows what she wants. But when do you want her to? Yuriko uses this distraction to slip away, which is to the detriment of her masquerade, as she bumps right into Mariko, the pair doing the mirror twin thing, until Yuriko gets a chance to hypnotize her so she falls unconscious? Look, I know Mariko can be a bit of a ditz in this continuity, but I didn't think that would work on her. Then again, this could be the show doing an actor illusion joke. Mariko and Yuriko are voiced by Noriko Hidaka after all, who on top of voicing Noriko Takaya in Gunbuster, is best known for playing Kikyo in Inuyasha, as well as Shemha Mephorash in Symphogear, among others. So one could say that she has a habit of playing supernatural evil sides and doppelgangers with points in mental domination talents. It's also ironic that every time she does it, she basically seems to be defeated by a hug. And yeah, Neto's having a hard time with Tamako's ferocity. their strength even showing by minor defects on Metal Man's fist that have been repaired time and again in their training to get better and better, something Neto sees and is amazed by, as they unleash their ultimate technique. Huh. You know, I didn't peg Metal Man for being a Beastmaster. Yeah, no, Beastman's interrupted the bout, too angry to take a no for an answer. And moving too fast thanks to the Dark Chip, for Neto to be able to send Rockman any chips before he's too injured to use them, even if Rockman was initially able to dodge Beastman's feral strikes. I love this character so damn much. The pair of rival Navis double-teaming the Beast proves too much, though. Rockman shooting out Beastman's eyes, as Metal Man's razors literally chop his legs off. And you would think that would cripple him, but it looks like these Dark Chips, as opposed to their game counterparts, grant limited regeneration capabilities at the cost of furthering the Navi's corruption. Yuriko taking advantage of this to use Needleman to sabotage the support system for the tower, cracking the entire structure of the place, flooding the parking lot, and the tremors causing Neto to lose grip on his PET, which falls into one of the crevices. With Tamako's help, they're able to retrieve it before it falls any further, but before they can fully get their hands back on it, Rockman's left to Beastman's mercy. And damn, this sequence is just well animated with how fast and furious they make this fight and the utter onslaught Rockman has to evade on his own, as Metal Man's too slow to be able to help Rockman tank the damage. Especially when Savage Man installs another Dark Chip that makes its form distort and become even more bestial. Personally, I consider this a bit of a visual predecessor to the Zoonoid Beast outforms for Navis that will get featured later down the line in .exe Beast. It all comes from somewhere, after all. Anyone kind of find it ironic that Beastman made no appearances during the Cyber Beast sector of the storyline? But when Metal Man is able to tank some damage, just damn. He stabbed through the core and still is able to throw down, as that's normally a death blow for a Navi. Metal Blade! Unfortunately, that super rock breaking technique's the limit of what Metal Man can do now. So to save his worthy rival, Metal Man transfers his data to Rockman in hopes he can finish the job. See, why is halving damage by default not an ability of Metal Soul in the games? Because that just makes too much sense. And it's not like it'd be broken for versus play, as it'd only be able to be used for 3 turns. Unfortunately, that only invokes round 2, the building being further damaged by the creation of a dimensional area, and Beastman realizing himself despite his injuries. Once more trying to attack before Neto can slot a chip, but unfortunately, he misses. And at no worse a time, as Beastman's overuse of the Dark Chips finally gets to him. Complete with a full-on purple palette swap and Beastman's words devolving into inane rambling. And with that, the first of the Dark Lloyds has finally been deleted. But what Neto and Rockman reached in that moment has completely exhausted them. Worse, what happened to Beastman has raised some uncomfortable questions for Shademan on what the true nature of his Faustian bargain with his benefactor is, as they claim to not know what was up with the Dark Lloyd in that fight, hiding the fact that Beastman's fate is what shall be the end of all those who utilize the power of Dark Chips. The wrap-up. We have 11th hour superpower, for Neto and Rockman very momentarily utilizing full synchro to boost the power of their last sword chip to a level capable of deleting Beastman on a counterattack. Yes, that is what canonically happens here. We have Nakatomi Tower Heist, for this entire scheme disguised as a random happenstance. We have I've Got Soul, for the acquisition of Metal Soul, the second Blue Moon related Soul Unison form. We've got One Punch Counter, for Metal Man and Metal Soul's Metal Break move. We have Iron Body, for Metal Soul boosting Rockman's defensive capabilities through the roof. Who knew that would happen in a rock, paper, scissors game if you gave a rock a full metal jacket? And we have Fanservice Fiesta, between Tamako in her crop top, Yuriko cosplaying as her sister, and Mariko giving the most overt fanservice and cutaways to her Hot Springs club enjoying the setup mini springs in the C-plot of the episode. Add in the action fanservice of them doing very well on animating the brawls, and if you're not just inundated as such already, your eyes are just going to end up glued to the screen. This episode marks the end of the first third of the season. While normally Japanese series are divided into 12 to 14 episode cores or quarters of content, Rockman Axess instead chose to follow more of an act structure, with this episode being the real conclusion of the first act of the show. Episodes 18 through 34 are more considered a cohesive second act, where more of the secrets kept from us are explained and explored. The entire status quo thrown for a loop, and new dynamics emerge. It isn't until episodes 35 through 51 does the show begin to push its focus towards more key resolution, while everything up to this point truly was more for setting up events, regrounding the story, and addressing where everyone previously in the cast had gone to. And I miss it when Japanese series were formatted like this. To be fair, a lot of Japanese series these days are cut down to 10 to 13 episode seasons if they aren't slated for 26-ish episode consistent runs, with the story continuing on in subsequent installments if they're given enough focus. But even the ones that get the full year order tend to rush their format into quarters so they have a 4-act structure. Or worse, 9 episodes for a 5-act structure. The problem with doing that is, well, a lot of them can end up feeling like they have too much, or conversely, not enough going on to fill that time. So the entire center of the show can just lag because it's too early to get to some plots that are meant to conclude the show, while they're likewise not far enough along to address others that have been waiting for attention. It's actually why shoving and making a story all about major plots can end up a detriment if they have no interesting or intriguing interim bad guys and side stories, as cutting out what can be perceived as filler can end up undermining the broadening of a sense of setting and character, meaning they often would need to be shoved in at awkward angles that don't add anything to what we've been given, and since they weren't given proper time, end up a detriment. It's also why I end up hating a lot of series that split a longer story into 2 decisively different seasons despite it being the same story told throughout, as then that ends up a 6-act story with the closing act repeated a second time, instead of them thinking to keep it as a 3-act story with a major cliffhanger at a relevant cutoff point. But yeah, overall this was a really good and impressive final bout with Beastman, and another shade of things to come as Neto and Rockman take a leap in ability here. Hell, until later events, I don't even think most people realize that this fight, if even only for a split second, was when they first utilized full synchro to counter and defeat Beastman as they did. And that is kind of fair. There isn't that distinct a divide in capabilities for that moment. And other abilities do take focus for the time being, which we'll be seeing more of as the Dark Lloyd arc enters its second phase going forward.